A 17-year-old is sold by his brothers and carried into Egypt as a slave. Years later, the men who sold him will enter that same country looking for food, and they will bow before him without knowing who he is. By then, Joseph will govern Egypt. He will have the power to save his brothers, punish them, or force them to confront what they did. But first, their hatred will tear him away from his father and turn one divided household into a family built around a devastating secret. That reversal begins in Canaan, in the household of Joseph's father, Jacob. Jacob was also called Israel, and his many sons did not stand on equal ground with one another. They had different mothers, different positions within the family, and different relationships with their father. Jacob's open preference for one son would make those divisions impossible to ignore. When Joseph was 17, he worked as a shepherd with some of his brothers, particularly the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, two of Jacob's wives. Joseph brought their father a bad report about them. The report placed Joseph in a difficult position among the brothers. He worked beside them, but what he observed could reach Jacob through him. He was one of the younger sons, yet he carried information from the field back to the father who governed the household. That report mattered because the brothers were away from Jacob with the animals that sustained the household. Joseph's words carried their conduct from the field into their father's hearing. Before any dream was spoken, he had already become the brother whose presence connected what happened among the flocks to Jacob's authority at home. Then Jacob gave the brothers a visible reason to resent him. Jacob loved Joseph more than he loved any of his other sons, because Joseph was the son born to him in his old age. He made Joseph a distinctive robe. The garment set Joseph apart whenever he appeared among them. Jacob's preference was no longer something the brothers had to infer from private affection. Their father had marked Joseph publicly with clothing none of them received. When they saw that Jacob loved Joseph more than all of them, they hated him. Their hostility grew so severe that they could not speak peaceably to him. Then Joseph had a dream. He told his brothers that they had all been binding sheaves of grain in a field. Joseph's sheaf rose and stood upright. The sheaves belonging to his brothers gathered around it and bowed down. The meaning was not difficult for them to recognize. "Are you really going to reign over us?" they asked. "Are you actually going to rule us?" Joseph held no position that placed him over the older brothers. He was still 17, working within his father's household, but he wore the robe of Jacob's chosen son, and now he was describing an image in which the others bowed before him. The dream added another layer to everything they already resented. They hated Joseph even more because of the dream and because he had told it to them. Then Joseph dreamed again. This time he saw the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowing down to him. He told the dream to his father as well as his brothers. Jacob rebuked him. "What is this dream you have had? Will your mother, your brothers, and I really come and bow down to the ground before you?" The rebuke did not erase the dream. Joseph's brothers responded with jealousy, while Jacob kept the matter in mind. The first dream placed Joseph above his brothers within the familiar work of binding grain. The second expanded the image until the whole family appeared beneath him. His brothers did not treat the dreams as harmless images. They heard claims of rule from the son their father had already raised above them in affection. Nothing visible in Joseph's circumstances explained how either dream would become reality. He owned no land, commanded no servants, and held no office. He remained under Jacob's authority and lived among brothers who had grown to hate him. Yet the images of rule and submission now stood inside a family already divided by favoritism. The danger did not arrive through a foreign enemy. It grew among Jacob's own sons. Joseph's brothers took their father's flock north to graze near Shechem. Jacob remained in the valley of Hebron. After some time, he called Joseph and told him that his brothers were pasturing the flock near Shechem. Jacob intended to send him to them. Joseph answered, "Here I am." His father instructed him to see whether his brothers were well and whether the flock was well, then return with word. Joseph left Hebron carrying a straightforward responsibility. He was to find the brothers, check on their welfare and the condition of the flock, and bring the information home. When Joseph reached the area around Shechem, he did not find them where he expected. A man found him wandering in the fields and asked what he was seeking. "I am looking for my brothers," Joseph said. "Please tell me where they are grazing the flock." The man had heard them say they were going to Dothan. Joseph continued after them and found them there. He did not abandon the assignment when Shechem proved empty. The information from a stranger sent him farther along the route, increasing the distance between Joseph and the father, who expected him to return. His persistence carried him farther from Jacob and closer to men who already hated his reports, his robe, and his dreams. His brothers saw him while he was still at a distance. Before Joseph came near enough to address them, they conspired to kill him. "Here comes that dreamer," they said. Then they formed a plan. They would kill Joseph, throw his body into one of the pits, and claim that a wild animal had devoured him. Then we will see what becomes of his dreams. Joseph had not yet reached them. The brothers had time to identify him, speak together, decide on murder, choose how to dispose of his body, and prepare the explanation they would give afterward. They treated his death as a way to decide the future for themselves. If the dreamer disappeared, then the rule pictured in his dreams would disappear with him. Reuben heard the plan and intervened. He was Jacob's firstborn. He told the others not to take Joseph's life and not to shed blood directly. Instead, they could throw him into a pit in the wilderness without laying a hand on him. Reuben intended to rescue Joseph from them and return him to Jacob. He did not reveal that intention to the other brothers. His proposal changed the immediate plan from direct murder to confinement, giving him an opportunity to recover Joseph later. It also left Joseph completely dependent on a rescue he knew nothing about. The brothers agreed not to strike the fatal blow themselves, but they still intended to abandon him in a wilderness pit. Reuben's private plan had created time, not safety. Joseph finally reached them. Before he could return to Jacob with news of their welfare, the brothers seized him. They stripped away the distinctive robe his father had made for him. The garment that represented Jacob's preference was the first thing they took. Then they threw Joseph into a pit. It was empty. There was no water in it. Joseph had left home as his father's trusted messenger. Now he was trapped in the ground by the brothers he had been sent to find. They had removed the clothing that displayed his place within Jacob's household, and the distance between Dothan and Hebron kept Jacob from knowing what had happened. Then the brothers sat down to eat. Their decision placed Joseph in the pit while they continued their meal above him. They had stopped short of killing him directly, but they had not released him or begun taking him home. His fate remained something they were deciding together. While they were eating, they looked up and saw a caravan approaching. Ishmaelite merchants were coming from Gilead, and their camels carried aromatic gum, balm, and resin toward Egypt. The arrival of the caravan changed what the brothers decided to do with Joseph. It gave them a way to remove him without killing him, and a way to profit from his disappearance. Judah spoke. "What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood?" He proposed that they sell Joseph to the Ishmaelites. Joseph was their brother, their own flesh. Judah used that bond to argue against murder, but not for release. Selling Joseph would keep his blood off their hands while still removing him from the family. The brothers agreed. As Midianite traders passed, Joseph was pulled out of the pit. He was sold for 20 pieces of silver to the Ishmaelites, and the merchants carried him toward Egypt. The price transformed their brother into property. The caravan already had a destination, and the sale placed Joseph inside its movement toward Egypt. Once the merchants continued south, the distance created by the brothers' decision would grow with every stage of the journey. The brothers, who had threatened to see what would become of Joseph's dreams, no longer needed to kill him. From their position in Canaan, the result looked almost as final. Joseph was being taken into a foreign country and sold into slavery. Jacob would not know where to search because Jacob would not be told that his son was alive. Reuben had intended to return to the pit. When he came back and saw that Joseph was gone, he tore his clothes. He returned to his brothers in distress. "The boy is gone. Where can I turn now?" Reuben had stopped the immediate murder, but his concealed rescue plan had failed. Joseph was beyond his reach, traveling south with merchants who had paid for him. The brothers now had to face the father who had sent Joseph into their care. They chose deception. They took Joseph's robe, slaughtered a male goat, and dipped the garment in its blood. The object that had displayed Jacob's favoritism would now be used to explain Joseph's disappearance. They controlled the evidence Jacob would receive. Joseph was absent and unable to speak. The robe was genuine, the blood was real, and the combination invited Jacob to imagine a death none of the brothers had witnessed because it had never happened. They sent the bloodied robe to Jacob and asked him to examine it. "We found this. Please determine whether it is your son's robe." They did not call Joseph their brother. They called him Jacob's son. They did not claim to have watched an animal attack him. They placed the garment before their father and allowed him to reach the conclusion they had prepared. Jacob recognized the robe. "It is my son's robe. A vicious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." The blood belonged to a goat, not to Joseph. But the robe was real, and Jacob's conclusion matched the evidence his sons had manufactured. The brothers had once looked at the robe and seen proof that Jacob loved Joseph more. Now Jacob looked at the same robe and saw proof that Joseph was dead. He tore his clothes, put sackcloth around his waist, and mourned for his son for many days. His sons and daughters tried to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "I will go down to the grave mourning for my son." And Jacob wept for Joseph. The brothers had succeeded in hiding the sale, but they could not control its consequences inside the household. Their retaliation against the favored son became the father's continuing grief. Every attempt to comfort Jacob took place among sons who knew that the blood was false and that Joseph had not been killed by an animal. Jacob believed Joseph had been torn apart. Reuben knew that Joseph had vanished from the pit. Judah and the others knew they had sold him. Joseph was alive, but he could not return to correct his father's conclusion. He could not expose the deception or reclaim the robe used to declare him dead. He entered Egypt as property and was offered for sale. There, the Midianites sold him to an Egyptian named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. In Canaan, Jacob continued mourning a son he believed was dead. Joseph's brothers continued living with the secret of what they had done, and in Egypt, Joseph entered the possession of a powerful royal official far beyond his father's reach. In Canaan, Judah left his brothers and settled near a man of Adullam named Hira. There, Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. He married her, and they had 3 sons. Their first son was named The second was Onan. The third was Shelah, who was born while Judah was at Chezib. When was old enough, Judah arranged a wife for him. Her name was Tamar. Through this marriage, Tamar entered Judah's family with a recognized place and the expectation of children. But was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. His death ended the marriage before Tamar had produced a child. Without a son, name and place within Judah's family had no descendant to carry them forward. Judah then instructed Onan to marry his brother's widow and fulfill his duty as a brother-in-law. The child produced through that union would continue the name and family line of the brother who had died. Onan knew that the offspring would not be counted as his own. Whenever he went to Tamar, he prevented conception, spilling his seed on the ground rather than providing a child for his brother. He accepted the sexual relationship while deliberately refusing the duty attached to it. His action kept Tamar without a child and prevented his dead brother from receiving the offspring Judah had ordered him to provide. What Onan did was evil in the sight of the Lord, and he also died. Now 2 of Judah's sons were dead, and Tamar remained without a child. Judah told her to return to her father's house and live there as a widow until Shelah grew up, when she expected to be given to him. His words appeared to preserve her future place in the family, but Judah feared that Shelah would die like his brothers. Tamar returned to her father's house, put on the garments of widowhood, and waited. Time passed. Shelah grew up, but Judah did not give him to Tamar. This left her bound to Judah's family without receiving what he had promised. He had told her to wait until Shelah matured. Once Shelah was grown, Judah still withheld him. Tamar remained Er's widow, but Judah gave her no path to the child who would continue that family line. Judah's delay was no longer explained by Shelah's age. The condition Judah had named was fulfilled, yet Tamar's position did not change. She remained in her father's house wearing the clothing of a widow, while Shelah continued his life without her. Then Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. After Judah's period of mourning, he went to Timnah with his friend Hirah to oversee the shearing of his sheep. Word reached Tamar that her father-in-law was traveling to Timnah. By then, she had seen that Shelah was grown and that she had not been given to him as his wife. Tamar removed her widow's clothing, covered herself with a veil, and wrapped herself so her identity was concealed. Then she sat at the entrance to Enaim, along the road Judah was taking toward Timnah. The change of clothing served a precise purpose. Her widow's garments publicly identified the condition Judah had imposed on her. Removing them and concealing her face prevented Judah from recognizing the woman he had left waiting for Shelah. When Judah saw her, he assumed she was a prostitute because her face was covered. He did not recognize his daughter-in-law. He turned aside from the road and approached her, asking to sleep with her. Tamar asked what he would give her. Judah promised to send a young goat from his flock. She asked for something she could hold as a pledge until the goat arrived. Judah asked what she wanted. Tamar named 3 personal objects: his seal, its cord, and the staff in his hand. These were not anonymous pieces of payment. The seal identified its owner, while the cord and staff belonged directly to Judah. Together, they could establish whose property they were. Judah gave them to her. He slept with her, and Tamar conceived by him. Then she left, removed the veil, and put her widow's garments back on. Outwardly, she returned to the condition Judah had assigned her. But she now carried the child she had been denied through Judah's sons, and she possessed the objects that identified the father. Judah kept his promise to send the goat. He sent it through Hirah, expecting his friend to recover the pledged items from the woman, but Hirah could not find her. He asked the men of that place where the shrine prostitute was, who had been beside the road at Enaim. They answered that no such woman had been there. Hirah returned to Judah with the goat and reported that he had been unable to find her. The local men had denied that a prostitute had been at that location. Judah decided not to pursue the matter. He said the woman should keep the pledged objects or they would become a laughingstock. He had sent the young goat, and Hirah had been unable to find her. For the moment, Judah accepted the loss of his seal, cord, and staff to avoid public ridicule. The goat remained undelivered, and the identifying objects remained in Tamar's hands. Judah did not know that she had conceived. About 3 months later, Judah received a report concerning his daughter-in-law. Tamar has acted as a prostitute, he was told, and now she is pregnant as a result. Judah responded with immediate judgment, "Bring her out and let her be burned." Judah had approached a woman he believed was a prostitute and had left his identifying possessions with her. Tamar, meanwhile, remained publicly bound to Judah's family as the widow promised to Shelah. Her pregnancy, therefore, appeared to violate that bond. Without knowing his own involvement, Judah pronounced a sentence against her. The man who had withheld the promised son now treated Tamar's pregnancy as an offense deserving death. As Tamar was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. "I am pregnant by the man who owns these." Then she presented the seal, the cord, and the staff. "Please identify whose these are." Judah had once helped place Joseph's bloodied robe before Jacob with a demand for recognition. Jacob identified the garment and accepted the false conclusion his sons intended. Now identifying evidence was placed before Judah, and the recognition exposed the man doing the judging. Judah examined the objects and acknowledged them. "She is more righteous than I am, because I did not give her to my son, Shelah." He did not deny that the seal, cord, and staff were his. He did not preserve his position by continuing to condemn Tamar after the evidence became clear. He openly named his own failure. He had withheld Shelah and left Tamar in the condition that led to her action. The judgment Judah pronounced could no longer stand once he recognized his pledges. Tamar had made his responsibility visible with objects he had handed over himself. Judah answered that exposure by acknowledging the truth rather than creating another deception. Judah did not have sexual relations with Tamar again. The encounter did not become a continuing union, but the children conceived through it remained part of Judah's household and line. When Tamar's time to give birth arrived, she was carrying twins. During the delivery, one child put out a hand. The midwife tied a scarlet thread around his wrist to mark him as the one who had appeared first, but he drew his hand back and his brother came out ahead of him. The midwife exclaimed over the breach he had made, and he was named Perez, a name associated with breaking through. Then the brother with the scarlet thread was born, and he was named Zerah. Even their birth overturned the expected order. The child whose hand appeared first did not emerge first. Perez broke through and came ahead of Zerah. Both boys continued the family line. Tamar had been denied through and Onan, and then kept from receiving through Shelah. Their birth gave Judah descendants through the woman whose claim he had failed to honor. Judah's household had been marked by wickedness, refusal of duty, death, fear, concealment, and judgment. Tamar's plan exposed what Judah had withheld, while Judah's own possessions prevented him from denying his responsibility. Faced with his seal, cord, and staff, he acknowledged that Tamar was more righteous than he was. That admission did not undo Joseph's sale or remove the secret carried by the brothers. But the man who had proposed selling Joseph rather than shedding his blood had now been forced to recognize his own wrongdoing in another family crisis. Perez and Zerah continued Judah's line through the woman he had failed to provide for. In Egypt, Joseph had been purchased by Potiphar, the officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. Joseph entered Potiphar's household at its lowest social level. He was a foreigner separated from his father, an enslaved man bought by Potiphar. But the Lord was with Joseph, and Joseph became successful. That success did not give him freedom. It became visible within the conditions of his enslavement. Joseph served in Potiphar's house, and the work placed in his hands prospered. Potiphar saw what was happening. He recognized that the Lord was with Joseph, and that everything Joseph did was being made successful. Potiphar had purchased Joseph as a Hebrew servant and observed that Joseph's work succeeded. Joseph found favor in Potiphar's sight and became his personal attendant. From there, Potiphar appointed him overseer of the house and placed everything he owned under Joseph's authority. The change was remarkable but incomplete. Joseph had arrived as merchandise purchased from traveling merchants. Now the man who owned him trusted him with the administration of a powerful Egyptian household. Joseph had no control over the decision that brought him to Egypt, but within Potiphar's service, he was entrusted with control over nearly everything around him. His authority grew through observable results. Potiphar first received Joseph as a slave, then drew him into personal service, and finally surrendered the management of his entire estate. Each increase in responsibility followed the success of what had already been placed in Joseph's hands. From the time Potiphar appointed Joseph over his house and possessions, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's household because of Joseph. The blessing extended across what Potiphar owned in the house and in the field. Potiphar responded by leaving everything he had in Joseph's hands. He stopped concerning himself with the details of his property. The only thing he personally attended to was the food he ate. For the first time since leaving Canaan, Joseph had risen. He was still enslaved, still believed dead by his father, and still separated from everyone who had known him before Egypt. Yet inside the household of Pharaoh's officer, Joseph had become the trusted authority over everything his master possessed, and that complete trust placed him at the center of Potiphar's house. Joseph was well-built and handsome, and Potiphar's wife noticed him. "Sleep with me," she said. Her demand placed Joseph in a dangerous conflict inside the household he managed. Potiphar had given him authority over everything he owned, but Joseph remained a slave. He could not leave the estate or remove himself from service, and the woman approaching him was his master's wife. Joseph refused. "Look," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house because of me. He has placed everything he owns under my authority. No one in this house is greater than I am, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife." Then Joseph named the act for what it was. "How then could I do this great evil and sin against God?" Joseph recognized two betrayals within the proposed act. Sleeping with Potiphar's wife would violate his master's complete trust, and it would be a sin against God. The extent of Joseph's authority made the violation more serious, not less. Potiphar had given him access to every part of the estate because he trusted Joseph to distinguish faithfully between what had been entrusted and what had been withheld. Potiphar's wife was the one boundary his master had named. Joseph would not cross it. His refusal did not end the pressure. Potiphar's wife spoke to Joseph day after day. He had to continue performing his work in the same household while she continued demanding that he sleep with her. Joseph would not listen to her. He would not lie beside her, and he would not remain with her. Those refusals went beyond rejecting one invitation. Joseph kept refusing the relationship itself and the access it required, yet his responsibilities still brought him into the house. Potiphar trusted him precisely because he was present, capable, and attentive to the work placed under his authority. Each new demand met the same answer. Repetition did not turn Joseph's refusal into negotiation, and proximity did not turn it into consent. He continued serving Potiphar without accepting what Potiphar's wife demanded from him. The position that displayed his faithfulness also kept him within reach of her pressure. Then, on one particular day, Joseph entered the house to perform his work. None of the other household servants was inside. Potiphar's wife caught Joseph by his garment. "Sleep with me." Joseph did not stay to argue. He left the garment in her hand and fled outside. His escape was immediate and physical. He chose to abandon the garment rather than remain within her grasp. But once Joseph was outside, Potiphar's wife possessed an object that belonged to him, and no other servant had been inside to see how it came into her hands. Joseph's action had protected him from committing the offense she demanded. it did not protect him from the use she made of the garment afterward. The object left behind during his refusal could be displayed without the moment of refusal being visible with it. When Potiphar's wife saw that Joseph had fled and left his garment behind, she called the men of the household. "Look," she told them, "he has brought us a Hebrew man to humiliate us." She claimed Joseph had come to sleep with her and that she had cried out loudly. According to her version, when Joseph heard her scream, he abandoned his garment beside her and fled outside. The physical details were arranged around the one object everyone could see. She held Joseph's clothing. Her accusation reversed the meaning of his flight. Joseph had fled because she seized him and demanded sex. She presented the same escape as the reaction of an attacker interrupted by her cry. She also changed the way the household was invited to see him. Joseph had been the overseer trusted with everything Potiphar owned. In her accusation, he became a Hebrew man, someone her husband had brought among them to disgrace them. His foreign identity moved to the front, while the responsibility he had earned inside the house disappeared. Potiphar had placed Joseph over the estate. Potiphar's wife now presented the household servants with an accusation against the Hebrew man her husband had brought among them. Potiphar's wife kept the garment beside her until her husband returned. The object remained available for a second accusation after the servants had heard the first. Then she told Potiphar what she said had happened, adjusting the charge to address him directly. "The Hebrew servant whom you brought to us came to me to humiliate me. But when I screamed for help, he left his garment beside me and fled outside." To the servants, she had said Potiphar brought them a Hebrew man. To Potiphar, she called Joseph the Hebrew servant he had brought to them. In both versions, she placed responsibility on Potiphar's decision to bring Joseph into the household and elevate him within it. The slave Potiphar had trusted above everyone else was now presented as a threat to Potiphar's own wife. The garment beside her appeared to connect Joseph physically to the accusation, while her repeated reference to Potiphar's choice connected the supposed offense to his judgment as master. The sequence gave Potiphar a complete accusation. His wife supplied the alleged approach, the cry, the escape, and the garment offered as evidence. Every true physical fact was arranged around a false explanation. Potiphar heard her description of what Joseph had supposedly done, and his anger burned. He seized Joseph and placed him in prison, in the place where the king's prisoners were confined. The authority Joseph had gained disappeared at once. He had managed the estate so completely that Potiphar concerned himself only with his food. Yet his faithful service did not protect Joseph from an accusation supported by the garment he had abandoned while escaping. His refusal cost him his position. For a second time, clothing associated with Joseph was made to communicate a false conclusion. His brothers had dipped his distinctive robe in blood and allowed Jacob to believe he was dead. Potiphar's wife held the garment Joseph left in her hand and used it to portray him as guilty. In Canaan, the bloodied robe concealed what Joseph's brothers had done to him. In Egypt, the abandoned garment concealed what Joseph had refused to do. The two deceptions used clothing differently but depended on the same advantage. The person presenting the garment also supplied its meaning. Jacob saw real clothing and real blood, but his sons concealed the sale. Potiphar's wife held Joseph's actual garment, but she concealed the demand that caused him to leave it. In both cases, the genuine garment gave credibility to a false claim. Jacob recognized clothing that truly belonged to Joseph, but the blood did not. Potiphar's wife truly held Joseph's garment, but her explanation for possessing it reversed the encounter. In each case, clothing was presented to the man whose judgment determined the consequence. Jacob examined the robe while Joseph traveled toward Egypt. Potiphar heard his wife describe Joseph's flight. The objects remained while Joseph's own actions were hidden behind someone else's explanation. The consequences were immediate. Joseph lost the authority he had gained in Potiphar's house. He lost the movement available even to a trusted household slave. He was confined in a prison connected to Pharaoh's government, the place reserved for prisoners of the king. That location kept Joseph within the reach of the royal system, but at its lowest point. Potiphar served Pharaoh as captain of the guard. The prison into which he placed Joseph held people confined under royal authority. Joseph had moved from managing an officer's estate to being held among the king's prisoners. The reversal was severe. Joseph had been taken from his family, stripped, thrown into a pit, and sold. In Egypt, his work had prospered until he became overseer of a powerful man's estate. That advancement had not made him free, but it had given him responsibility, trust, and a stable place within the household. Now, all of it was gone, because Joseph had refused to betray the trust on which it rested. The accusation followed him into confinement. Potiphar did not restore him to the house, and the garment was not given another meaning. Joseph entered the king's prison under his master's authority and remained there. Yet the same favor that had distinguished Joseph in Potiphar's household appeared again behind prison walls. The Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love. Joseph found favor in the sight of the prison keeper. The keeper began entrusting the other prisoners to Joseph. All the prisoners in that place were placed under his hand, and whatever work was done there, Joseph was the one who carried it out. This was not a single assignment given to occupy one prisoner. The keeper transferred the supervision of the prisoners to Joseph. Their work, their organization, and the tasks performed within the prison passed under his direction. Once again, responsibility widened around him. In Potiphar's house, Joseph began as a purchased servant and became overseer of the estate. In prison, he entered as a condemned man and became the person through whom the prison's work was managed. The prison keeper paid no attention to anything under Joseph's authority. The Lord was with Joseph, and the Lord made everything he did successful. The keeper's trust was practical and extensive. He did not merely speak well of Joseph or give him lighter treatment. He placed other men under Joseph's hand and ceased monitoring the responsibilities he had assigned. Joseph had entered with no reputation the keeper was required to honor. His former authority belonged to Potiphar's house, and his presence in prison marked him as a man under judgment. Yet within confinement, the results of Joseph's work again produced complete administrative trust. Joseph's circumstances had changed, but the quality of his service had not. He had managed a household. Now he managed the activities of prisoners. He had been trusted by the captain of the guard. Now he was trusted by the man responsible for confinement. The sphere of his responsibility was harsher, but the transfer of authority was real. The prison keeper treated Joseph as Potiphar once had. He entrusted his work to Joseph and no longer concerned himself with what had been placed under Joseph's hand. Joseph's success therefore survived the loss of Potiphar's favor. It did not depend on the robe Jacob had given him, the office Potiphar had granted him, or the reputation Potiphar's wife had destroyed. The Lord remained with him after each of those things had been taken away. Nothing outside the prison had changed. Potiphar did not release him. Jacob continued believing Joseph was dead. The brothers in Canaan continued living with the secret of the sale. Joseph's position in confinement corrected none of those conditions. What changed was the prison itself. The keeper gave Joseph responsibility for the men and work around him. Tasks were completed under his direction. The man, officially responsible for the prison, found no need to supervise what Joseph managed because the Lord made Joseph's work succeed. That success established Joseph once more as the trusted administrator beneath another man's authority. It also placed him among prisoners connected to Pharaoh. Everything done inside the prison passed through Joseph's hands, but he remained confined with no visible route out. Then 2 officials from Pharaoh's own household were placed within Joseph's care. One was the king's chief cupbearer, the man responsible for serving Pharaoh's drink. The other was the chief baker, responsible for food prepared for the king. Both held trusted positions close to Egypt's ruler, and both had offended their master. Pharaoh became angry with them and placed them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain assigned Joseph to attend them, and the 2 officials remained in custody for some time. The arrangement brought Joseph into direct contact with men from Pharaoh's court, but neither official was in a position to help him. They had lost the king's favor and were waiting under guard. Joseph served them as part of his responsibility in the prison. Then, during the same night, both men had dreams. The cupbearer's dream was different from the baker's, and each dream carried its own meaning. When morning came, Joseph entered and saw the 2 men. He noticed that they were troubled. This was a small but important act. Joseph did not merely complete an assigned task and leave. He looked at the men under his care closely enough to see that something had changed. Their faces showed distress, and he asked why they looked so dejected that day. They told him they had each dreamed, but there was no one available to interpret the dreams. For officials from Pharaoh's court, that absence mattered. The cupbearer and baker were in prison, and their dreams remained unresolved. Joseph answered, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." He did not present interpretation as a technique he controlled independently. Before hearing any detail, he placed the matter with God. Then he invited the men to speak. The chief cupbearer went first. In his dream, a vine stood before him. The vine had 3 branches. As it budded, its blossoms opened, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in the cupbearer's hand. He took the grapes, pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. The dream compressed growth, ripening, preparation, and service into one movement. More importantly for the imprisoned official, it showed him performing his former duty again. He held Pharaoh's cup and personally delivered it to the king. The cup in the dream returned to the same hand and the same royal service the official had lost. Joseph gave the interpretation. The 3 branches represented 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh would lift up the cupbearer's head and restore him to his position. He would once again place Pharaoh's cup in the king's hand, just as he had done before he was imprisoned. The message was specific. It identified the length of the wait, the decision Pharaoh would make, and the office to which the cupbearer would return. This was not a general promise that his circumstances would improve. In 3 days, he would stand again in his former place beside Egypt's ruler. Joseph then made a personal request. "When things go well with you, remember me," he said. "Show me kindness by mentioning me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house." Joseph had interpreted the dream without demanding payment or bargaining for the meaning. Only after giving the message did he ask the cupbearer to remember him once the official regained access to Pharaoh. He explained why. Joseph said that he had been forcibly taken from the land of the Hebrews. He also said that even in Egypt, he had done nothing deserving confinement in the dungeon. Joseph described his forced removal from the land of the Hebrews and his undeserved confinement in the dungeon. But he clearly denied that either stage of his suffering was just. He had been taken from his homeland, and he had been imprisoned without committing the offense that would justify it. The restored cupbearer would be uniquely positioned to act on that information. He would not merely leave the prison. He would return to personal service before Pharaoh. Joseph did not ask him to conduct an escape or use force against the prison keeper. He asked him to speak, to carry Joseph's case into the presence of the one man with authority over the royal prison and the officials connected to it. The chief baker had listened to the interpretation. When he saw that the meaning given to the cupbearer's dream was favorable, he told Joseph his own dream. He had seen 3 baskets of bread on his head. In the uppermost basket were all kinds of baked food prepared for Pharaoh, but birds were eating the food from the basket above him. The baker's dream resembled the cupbearer's in several ways. There were 3 repeated objects. The contents belonged within his royal work. Pharaoh's food was present, just as Pharaoh's cup had been present. The baker was again connected to what he had once prepared for the king, but the crucial movement was different. The cupbearer had taken the grapes, pressed them, and placed the cup directly into Pharaoh's hand. The baker did not deliver the food. Birds descended and ate it from the basket while it remained on his head. Joseph gave the interpretation as plainly as he had given the first. The 3 baskets represented 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh would lift up the baker's head from him, hang him on a tree, and the birds would eat the flesh from his body. The cupbearer would be lifted from custody and restored. The baker would be lifted from custody and executed. One would return to the work shown in his dream. The other would become the food consumed by the birds in his. Joseph did not change the second interpretation because the baker had spoken after hearing a favorable answer. He did not imitate the shape of the first dream and offer the same outcome. The 2 officials had dreamed on the same night, and both dreams would be fulfilled after the same interval, but they pointed toward opposite decisions. 3 days later, Pharaoh celebrated his birthday and gave a feast for all his servants. During the feast, he brought the cases of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker back before his officials. He lifted up the head of each man from the place of confinement, but the shared phrase divided into 2 different fates. Pharaoh restored the chief cupbearer to his position. Once again, the cupbearer placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Pharaoh hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had interpreted. The chief cupbearer resumed his service before Pharaoh, but forgot Joseph. Joseph remained imprisoned in the dungeon. 2 full years passed. Then Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing beside the Nile. 7 cows came up from the river. They were healthy, well-fed, and pleasing in appearance, and they grazed among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows came out of the Nile. These were gaunt and ugly, and they stood beside the healthy cows on the riverbank. Then the 7 gaunt cows ate the 7 healthy ones. Pharaoh awoke. He fell asleep again and had a second dream. This time, 7 heads of grain grew from one stalk. They were full and good. After them, 7 thin heads sprouted, scorched by the east wind. The thin heads swallowed the 7 full heads. Pharaoh awoke again and realized he had been dreaming. The 2 dreams shared the same disturbing movement. In each, 7 healthy sources of life appeared first. Then 7 ruined forms came after them and consumed what was healthy. The gaunt cows remained gaunt, and the thin grain remained thin. By morning, Pharaoh's spirit was troubled. He summoned all the magicians and wise men of Egypt and told them what he had seen. No one could interpret the dreams for him. Pharaoh had access to the men regarded as wise throughout his kingdom, but their combined knowledge produced no answer. They heard the repeated number, the healthy cattle and full grain, and the ruined cattle and scorched heads that consumed them. Still, Pharaoh remained without an interpretation. The failure was complete. Pharaoh had not summoned one advisor and rejected one answer. He had called for the magicians and wise men of Egypt, told them the dreams, and received no interpretation from any of them. Their silence brought the chief cupbearer back to the promise he had forgotten. He spoke to Pharaoh. "Today I remember my offenses." Then he described the time Pharaoh had been angry with him and the chief baker. "Pharaoh was angry with his servants and placed me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard. We each had a dream on the same night, and each dream had its own meaning. A young Hebrew man had been there with them, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. Everything happened exactly as the Hebrew had said. As he interpreted to us, so it happened. Pharaoh restored me to my office, and he hanged the baker. The cupbearer now gave Pharaoh the information Joseph had asked him to deliver 2 years earlier. Joseph was young, Hebrew, and held as a servant in the royal prison, but he had interpreted 2 dreams with opposite outcomes and named what would happen before Pharaoh announced either decision. The cupbearer's own position made his testimony direct. He had heard Joseph's words while still confined. 3 days later, he had returned to Pharaoh's service exactly as Joseph said. He was now standing before the same ruler, identifying the forgotten prisoner who had interpreted the dreams. One official had returned to Pharaoh's side, the other had been executed. The man who correctly distinguished those futures remained in the dungeon. Pharaoh sent for Joseph. Joseph was brought quickly out of the prison. He shaved, changed his clothes, and appeared before Pharaoh. The forgotten prisoner now stood before the ruler whose dreams no one else could explain. He had left his work among the prisoners because the ruler of Egypt now needed the ability the cupbearer had witnessed. Joseph came from prison into Pharaoh's presence. Pharaoh told him, "I have had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said about you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." The reputation reached Joseph through the cupbearer's report. Pharaoh understood that Joseph possessed an ability his magicians and wise men had not displayed. Joseph corrected that understanding before hearing the dreams. "It is not in me," he answered. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Joseph did not claim the power as his own. He had told the cupbearer and baker that interpretations belonged to God. He now said the same before Pharaoh. The authority of the listener had changed, but Joseph's explanation had not. His first words placed a limit on Pharaoh's expectation. Joseph would speak, but the answer would not originate in Joseph. The prisoner, summoned for his unusual ability, directed the king beyond himself before a single image was interpreted. Pharaoh began with the first dream. He had been standing on the bank of the Nile when 7 healthy, well-fed cows came out of the river and grazed among the reeds. After them came 7 other cows. They were weak, ugly, and extremely thin. Pharaoh said he had never seen such ugly cows throughout all the land of Egypt. The thin cows ate the first 7, the healthy ones. But even after consuming them, there was no visible improvement. No one would have known that they had eaten. They remained as gaunt and ugly as before. Then Pharaoh awoke. In his second dream, 7 full and good heads of grain grew from one stalk. After them came 7 withered, thin heads scorched by the east wind. The thin heads swallowed the 7 good heads. Pharaoh had told the dreams to his magicians, but none could explain them. When Pharaoh repeated the dreams to Joseph, he emphasized the result of the first. The healthy cows disappeared completely, yet the starved animals remained as ruined as they had been before. Consumption did not satisfy them. What was full vanished into what was empty. Joseph answered that Pharaoh's 2 dreams carried one message. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 healthy cows represented 7 years. The 7 full heads of grain also represented 7 years. The 2 images pointed to the same period. The cows and grain did not describe separate periods of abundance. Both repeated the same 7 good years, presenting one coming season through 2 different images. The dreams are one. The 7 gaunt cows that came afterward represented another 7 years. So did the 7 empty heads scorched by the east wind. Those would be 7 years of famine. The ruined cows and scorched grain likewise described the same 7 years of famine. They did not add a second disaster after the first. Together they confirmed one devastating period. This is what I have told Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Joseph then explained the sequence binding the two periods together. 7 years of great abundance were coming throughout Egypt. The land would produce richly during that time. After them, 7 years of famine would arise. The famine would be so severe that the earlier abundance would be forgotten. It would consume the land, just as the gaunt cows consumed the healthy cattle, and the scorched heads swallowed the full grain. The abundance would no longer be evident because of the famine that followed. This explained the disturbing detail Pharaoh had emphasized. The starved cows swallowed what was healthy without becoming healthy themselves. The years of famine would absorb the produce of the good years without losing their severity. The first period would be extraordinary, but it would not protect Egypt unless its abundance was preserved. The same movement appeared in the grain. Full heads grew first, but the thin heads took them completely. Both dreams began with prosperity and ended with devastation. Joseph also explained why Pharaoh had received the warning twice in different forms. The matter had been firmly determined by God, and God would bring it about soon. The repeated dream established that Pharaoh was not being shown an uncertain possibility. The sequence was fixed: abundance first, famine second. It would begin soon enough that Egypt's response had to be prepared before the prosperous years were wasted. The dreams revealed more than danger. They revealed the only period in which Egypt could prepare. The famine had not yet begun. 7 abundant years would come first. If those years were treated only as a time for consumption, the country would enter the famine without protection. If part of their produce was preserved, the abundance could sustain Egypt after the fields stopped yielding. Joseph moved directly from interpretation to action. Now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. The administrator would have to understand the meaning of the good years while they were happening. Their abundance was not merely prosperity to be enjoyed. It was the provision from which Egypt's survival would be built. He would also have to turn understanding into coordinated action. The interpretation identified the future, but grain still had to be collected from the harvests, placed in the cities, and kept for the famine. Let Pharaoh take action and appoint overseers over the land. Let him take 1/5 of the produce of Egypt during the 7 abundant years. The abundance would fill the whole land, so the collection had to reach throughout the land. The good years would continue for 7 years, so preparation had to continue while they lasted. The portion Joseph named gave the plan a clear measure. Each abundant year would contribute 1/5. Preparation would begin with the abundance and continue alongside it. Joseph proposed gathering 1/5 rather than taking the entire harvest. Most of each year's produce would remain available during the years of plenty, while a consistent portion would be set aside for the future. Let them gather all the food of these coming good years and store up grain under Pharaoh's authority as food in the cities, and let them keep it. The cities would receive grain from the surrounding abundance and hold it for the years when those same regions needed food. Pharaoh's authority would unite the effort across Egypt. The food shall be a reserve for the land during the 7 years of famine that will occur in Egypt, so that the land will not perish during the famine. Joseph's plan was complete. The prisoner summoned to explain Pharaoh's dreams had now described both the approaching catastrophe and the discerning administrator Egypt required. Pharaoh had not yet named that administrator. The proposal seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. Pharaoh looked at the men around him and asked, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" The question changed Joseph's position before the court. He had entered as a prisoner, summoned to interpret dreams. Pharaoh now identified him as the man uniquely qualified to govern the response. Then Pharaoh spoke directly to Joseph. "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one as discerning and wise as you." Joseph had said Egypt needed a discerning and wise administrator. Pharaoh had heard him explain what none of the magicians or wise men could explain. Joseph had also turned the warning into a plan, reaching across 14 years. Pharaoh did not begin a search for someone else. "You will be over my house, and all my people will obey your command. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." Then Pharaoh made the appointment national. "I hereby place you over all the land of Egypt." Joseph had entered the audience with no Egyptian rank. He would leave it with authority beneath Pharaoh alone. Pharaoh removed his signet ring from his own hand and placed it on Joseph's. The ring allowed decisions made by Joseph to carry the authority of the throne. Pharaoh was not merely asking him to offer advice during the good years. He was giving Joseph the power required to direct Egypt's preparation. The appointment joined responsibility with the authority needed to fulfill it. Joseph had proposed a collection reaching throughout Egypt. Pharaoh now placed the entire country under the command of the man who had proposed it. Pharaoh dressed Joseph in fine linen and placed a gold chain around his neck. Joseph's new clothing publicly identified the office Pharaoh had given him. He had been brought from prison after shaving and changing his clothes. Now the king himself supplied the visible marks of elevation. Pharaoh had Joseph ride in the second royal chariot. People went before him, calling for everyone to bow the knee. The appointment was announced beyond the private audience. Officials and citizens were being shown the man whose commands would govern the land. The second chariot placed Joseph immediately beneath Pharaoh within the public order of Egypt. Pharaoh repeated the extent of that command. "I am Pharaoh, but without your consent, no one will lift hand or foot throughout all the land of Egypt." Pharaoh remained the king, and Joseph's authority came from him. But within that order, Egypt was placed under Joseph's direction. The country would need to surrender part of 7 years of harvests and submit to one plan. Joseph now possessed the authority to require it. Every stage of preparation could now proceed under one command. The collection of produce, the work of the appointed officials, and the placement of food in Egypt's cities would all answer to Joseph as the ruler Pharaoh had chosen. Pharaoh also gave Joseph an Egyptian name, Zaphenath-Paneah. He gave him a wife, Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, a priest of On. Joseph received more than an office. He received an Egyptian name and an Egyptian household connected to a priestly family. Then Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout the land of Egypt. He was 30 years old when he entered Pharaoh's service. The appointment immediately became active. Joseph did not remain beside Pharaoh, waiting for the dreams to begin. He moved through the country over which he had been placed. Then the 7 years of abundance arrived. The land produced plentifully, just as Joseph had interpreted. Fields throughout Egypt yielded extraordinary harvests. Joseph gathered food during all 7 years. He collected produce from the fields surrounding each city and stored it within that city. The arrangement connected each region's abundance with its own urban center. Produce from the surrounding fields was brought together while the harvests were still strong and placed where it would later be available. The work continued year after year. The first abundant harvest did not end the collection, neither did the second or third. Joseph maintained the same preparation across the full period Pharaoh's dreams had announced. Grain accumulated in enormous quantities like the sand of the sea. Eventually, Joseph stopped measuring it because it was beyond measure. Measurement ended, but collection continued. Egypt's fields kept producing, and Joseph kept gathering. The reserve grew until its quantity was described not by a final number, but by comparison with the sand along the sea. The amount showed how great the abundance had become. Egypt was producing enough for ordinary life and enough for Joseph to gather reserves on a scale that passed beyond counting. The healthy cows and full heads of grain had become years of actual harvest, but their fulfillment did not end the work. The abundant years were the first part of the warning, and everything gathered during them was intended for the second. Joseph's office became visible through administration rather than ceremony alone. The signet, linen, chain, and chariot had announced his authority. The grain accumulated in city after city showed what he did with it. Throughout 7 years of plentiful production, Joseph converted the opportunity revealed in Pharaoh's dreams into a food supply for conditions Egypt had not yet experienced. Before the years of famine began, Asenath gave birth to 2 sons. Joseph named the first Manasseh. God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's household. Joseph connected the boy's name with what God had done. His explanation named both his suffering and the household from which he had been separated. He had not lost knowledge of that household. He referred to it directly while naming his son in Egypt. His family remained part of the words he used to explain Manasseh's name. Joseph named his second son Ephraim. God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. Again, Joseph gave the explanation himself. Egypt was the place where he had become fruitful, and he still called it the land of his affliction. Both sons were born before the famine, during the years when Joseph's administration was gathering Egypt's abundance. His household grew during the same period in which the storehouses filled. The names Manasseh and Ephraim kept Joseph's own explanations within that household. One referred to God, making him forget hardship and his father's house. The other referred to God, making him fruitful in affliction. Joseph did not name Pharaoh as the source of either change. Pharaoh had appointed him, given him authority, named him, and arranged his marriage. Joseph credited God in the explanations attached to both sons. Then the 7 years of abundance ended. The 7 years of famine began, exactly as Joseph had said. The change confirmed that Pharaoh's dreams revealed one sequence rather than 2 disconnected images. Egypt had experienced the healthy cows and full grain. Now the period represented by the gaunt cows and scorched heads had arrived. Famine spread through the surrounding lands. But throughout Egypt there was food. Egypt did not remain fertile while the other countries suffered. The famine reached Egypt too. The difference was that Joseph had gathered grain before the fields stopped providing what the population needed. The stored abundance now became the country's protection. As the famine intensified, all Egypt became hungry, and the people cried to Pharaoh for food. Pharaoh directed them to Joseph. Go to Joseph, do whatever he tells you. The people who appealed to the throne were sent to the ruler Pharaoh had placed over the grain. Joseph's authority now governed not only collection during prosperity, but distribution during hunger. When the famine had spread across the face of the land, Joseph opened the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians. The reserves remained under his control until the need they had been created to meet arrived. Then Joseph released them. The population began living from food gathered during the earlier abundance. Grain produced years before now moved from the storehouses into households facing famine. The country's survival depended on work performed before the crisis was visible. Joseph's interpretation and plan were now being tested together. It was not enough that he had correctly predicted 7 abundant years and 7 years of famine. Egypt needed the food he had proposed collecting, and that food had to be available when the people cried out. It was. The famine became severe in Egypt. Still, the grain remained available for Joseph to open the reserves and continue selling. Then people from outside Egypt began arriving. Every surrounding country came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe throughout the lands. They came to Joseph, the governor Pharaoh had placed over Egypt's food. The nations arriving in Egypt confirmed the reach of the disaster. The famine was not confined to one Egyptian district or one neighboring land. People crossed borders because the food Joseph had stored offered what their own countries no longer supplied. The reach of Joseph's office therefore expanded with the crisis. During abundance, he governed Egypt's collection. During famine, Egyptians came to him for food. As scarcity spread, people from other countries also entered Egypt and depended on his administration. The ruler who controlled the grain was himself a foreigner. Joseph had entered Egypt without status and had been sold into an Egyptian household. Now foreigners entered the country because Pharaoh had placed its food under Joseph's authority. They came because their own lands were under famine, and Joseph possessed grain capable of keeping them alive. The political reversal was complete. Joseph bore Pharaoh's signet, commanded the country, directed its storehouses, and controlled food sought by surrounding nations. But his family division remained unresolved. Beyond Egypt's borders lived the father who believed Joseph had been killed. The famine also reached Jacob's household in Canaan, bringing the unresolved division within the family toward Joseph, and the grain they needed was in Joseph's hands. Jacob learned that grain was available in Egypt. He looked at his sons and asked, "Why are you staring at one another?" Then he told them that he had heard there was grain in Egypt. They were to go down and buy food so the household could live rather than die. 10 of Joseph's brothers prepared for the journey. Jacob did not send Benjamin with them because he feared that harm would come to him. Benjamin was Joseph's younger brother, the other son Jacob still associated with the son he had lost. 10 brothers would face the dangers of the road and the uncertainties of Egypt. Benjamin would remain beside his father. The decision divided Jacob's sons before the journey began. The 10 who had returned without Joseph years earlier were sent into Egypt together, while Joseph's younger brother remained under Jacob's protection. The sons of Israel traveled with the other people, coming to buy grain because the famine had reached Canaan. Joseph was the governor of Egypt, and he controlled the sale of grain to the peoples arriving from other lands. When his brothers entered his presence, they bowed before him with their faces to the ground. The image from Joseph's first dream had become reality. The brothers who once heard that their sheaves would bow around his now lowered themselves before him because they needed the food under his authority. They had tried to prevent his rule by selling him away. That sale had carried Joseph into the country where he now ruled, but they did not know they were bowing to Joseph. More than 20 years had passed since they had last seen him at 17. He now held an Egyptian office, wore Egyptian authority, and bore the name Pharaoh had given him. They came before Egypt's governor for grain and failed to recognize Joseph. Joseph recognized them immediately. He treated them as strangers and spoke harshly. "Where have you come from?" "From the land of Canaan," they answered, "to buy food." Joseph knew his brothers, but they did not recognize him. That difference gave him control not only over the grain they needed, but also over what they understood about the encounter. He knew their identity, their shared history, and the crime hidden from their father. They knew only that Egypt's governor was questioning them. Then Joseph remembered the dreams he had dreamed about them. He accused them of being spies. They had come, he said, to discover where the land was exposed. The brothers denied it. "No, my lord, your servants have come to buy food." They called themselves sons of one man and honest men, not spies. The claims stood before Joseph in all its unresolved weight. These were the men who had sold him and deceived Jacob with his bloodied robe. They did not know that the ruler hearing their defense was the one person in Egypt who knew what their honesty had once looked like. Joseph repeated the accusation. They answered by giving more information about their family. "Your servants were 12 brothers, sons of one man in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more." Joseph heard himself described as the missing brother. To Jacob he was dead. To these men he was no more. They did not say they had sold him. They reduced his absence to a fact without explaining how it happened. Their answer also revealed that Jacob was alive and that Benjamin remained with him. Joseph now knew his father had survived the years of mourning. He knew his younger brother had grown up in Canaan, but he did not reveal himself. Instead, Joseph said their own words would be tested. By the life of Pharaoh, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. He first ordered them to send one brother to bring Benjamin while the others remained confined. In that way, their claim would be tested. If they failed, Joseph said, then by the life of Pharaoh they were spies. He placed all of them in custody for 3 days. For those 3 days, none of the brothers could carry grain home, warn Jacob, or bring Benjamin. Joseph's accusation had stopped the journey on which their households depended. The brothers had once thrown Joseph into an empty pit and continued without him. Now they were confined together under Joseph's authority, unable to return to Canaan and unable to prove their words without the brother Jacob had refused to send. On the 3rd day, Joseph changed the terms. "Do this and live," he told them, "for I fear God." If they were honest men, one brother would remain confined while the others carried grain home to their hungry households. Then they were to bring the youngest brother back to Joseph. Their words would be confirmed, and they would not die. The revised arrangement allowed 9 brothers to return with food. It also left one brother dependent on whether the others came back for him. The demand placed the family under a form of pressure they had faced before. One brother would be separated and left behind. The others could go home. Their own safety and their household survival could be secured for the moment without resolving what happened to the brother who remained. This time, the brothers began speaking about Joseph. "Surely we are guilty because of our brother," they said to one another. "We saw his distress when he pleaded with us, but we would not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us." Joseph had pleaded with them. The brothers had seen his suffering in the pit and heard him appeal to them. They had refused to listen. Now, under pressure from an Egyptian ruler they did not recognize, they connected their own confinement and danger with the brother whose pleas they ignored. Reuben answered them, "Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy, but you would not listen? Now an accounting is required for his blood." Reuben remembered his warning, but his words also showed what the brothers believed about the outcome. Joseph's blood was being required. They spoke as men facing consequences for a brother they believed was dead. They did not know Joseph understood them. Throughout the official exchange, Joseph had spoken through an interpreter. His brothers therefore assumed the Egyptian governor could not understand their private conversation. They spoke freely in front of him about their guilt, Joseph's pleas, and the reckoning they believed had arrived. Joseph heard every word. He turned away from them and wept. Then he returned and spoke to them again. Joseph selected Simeon and had him bound before their eyes. The brothers watched one of their own placed in confinement. Unlike the day Joseph vanished, they would have to return to their father and explain truthfully that a son had been left behind. Joseph then gave orders concerning the grain. His servants were to fill the brothers' sacks. Each man's silver was to be returned secretly to his sack, and they were to receive provisions for the journey. The hidden payment changed the danger without the brothers knowing it. Joseph sent them away with the food they needed, but the silver placed inside every sack would make their position before Egypt appear even more suspicious. From their perspective, they had bought grain, lost Simeon to Egyptian custody, and received an ultimatum to return with Benjamin. They loaded their donkeys and left. At a lodging place along the road, one brother opened his sack to feed his donkey. There, at the mouth of the sack, he saw his silver. "My money has been returned. It is here in my sack." Their hearts failed, and they turned trembling toward one another. "What is this that God has done to us?" The money did not look like a gift to men who had just been accused of espionage. They had paid for grain and left under strict terms. Finding the silver back in a sack created another danger. They could now appear to have taken both Egypt's food and the payment used to buy it. They continued to Canaan and came to Jacob. Then they told him everything that had happened. The man who ruled Egypt had spoken harshly and accused them of spying on the country. They had answered that they were honest men, 12 brothers from one father. One brother was no more, and the youngest remained with their father in Canaan. The Egyptian ruler had told them how they would prove their honesty. They were to leave one brother with him, carry food home for their hungry households, and return with the youngest. Then he would know they were not spies. He would release their brother and allow them to move freely in the land. Their report placed the decision before Jacob. Simeon's release depended on Benjamin's appearance in Egypt. The families standing before the governor also depended on it. Yet Benjamin was the son Jacob had refused to risk on the first journey. Then the brothers emptied their sacks. Each man found his bundle of silver inside. The discovery was no longer limited to the money seen at the lodging place. Every payment had been returned. When Jacob and his sons saw the bundles, they were afraid. The evidence could make all of them look guilty. The brothers had left Egypt after being accused of spying, and now they possessed the grain as well as the silver that should have paid for it. Even if they returned, they would have to explain something none of them had knowingly done. Jacob responded to the entire situation as another loss of his sons. "You have bereaved me. Joseph is no more. Simeon is no more. And now you want to take Benjamin. Everything is against me." Jacob spoke of Simeon as though he too had disappeared. Simeon was alive in an Egyptian prison, but Jacob had no power to retrieve him without surrendering Benjamin to the same journey. Reuben offered a guarantee. He told Jacob that if he did not bring Benjamin back, Jacob could put Reuben's 2 sons to death. Reuben asked his father to entrust Benjamin to him, and he promised to return him. The offer did not persuade Jacob. "My son will not go down with you." Then Jacob named the loss that governed his refusal. His brother is dead, and he alone is left. Jacob had other sons standing before him, including Reuben, who was offering the lives of his own children as security. But Benjamin was the surviving brother of Joseph, the son Jacob still believed had been torn apart. Jacob said that if harm came to Benjamin during the journey, his sons would bring his gray hair down to the grave in sorrow. The brothers had brought home grain, but their claim to be honest remained under suspicion. The money returned in every sack made another accusation possible. Simeon remained bound in Egypt. Joseph remained concealed behind the authority of an Egyptian governor. Benjamin remained beside Jacob, and Jacob's refusal created an impasse the family could not escape while the famine continued. The grain from Egypt could feed them only for a time. It did not release Simeon or satisfy the governor who had demanded Benjamin. Soon the household would need food again, and the next journey carried a price Jacob had said he would not pay. The famine remained severe in the land. Jacob's household consumed the grain brought from Egypt, and the day came when their supply could no longer sustain them. Jacob told his sons to return and buy a little more food. Judah answered by repeating the condition imposed by Egypt's governor. The man solemnly warned us, "You will not see my face again unless your brother is with you." If Jacob sent Benjamin, they would go down and buy food. If Jacob refused, they would not go, because the ruler had made Benjamin's presence the price of another audience. Jacob asked why they had brought such trouble upon him by telling the man they had another brother. The sons explained that the governor had questioned them closely about themselves and their family. Was their father still alive? Did they have another brother? They had answered according to what he asked. They had not known he would order them to bring Benjamin. From their perspective, the questions had come from an Egyptian official investigating suspected spies. They did not know that Joseph was asking about the father he had not seen for decades, or the full brother who had been a child when Joseph disappeared. What sounded to Jacob like careless disclosure had occurred under the scrutiny of the man controlling whether they would leave with grain. Then Judah spoke directly to his father. "Send the boy with me. We will arise and go, so that we, you, and our children may live and not die." Judah did not offer the lives of someone else as collateral. He made himself responsible. "I will guarantee him. You may require him from my hand. If I do not bring him back and set him before you, I will bear the blame before you all my life." Then he pointed to the cost of continued delay. If they had not waited so long, they could already have traveled to Egypt and returned twice. The contrast with Judah's earlier treatment of Joseph was sharp. At Dothan, he had proposed selling one favored brother so the others could profit and move on without shedding blood. Now another favored brother stood between the family and survival, and Judah pledged himself to bring that brother home. His guarantee did not remove the danger. The Egyptian governor still held Simeon. The returned silver remained unexplained. Benjamin would have to travel through a famine-stricken region and appear before a ruler who had accused the brothers of espionage. But refusing the journey now carried a clear consequence. Without Egyptian grain, Jacob's household would die. Jacob yielded. He instructed his sons to take some of the finest products of Canaan as a gift for the man: balm, honey, aromatic gum, myrrh, pistachio nuts, and almonds. Even during famine, the family possessed small quantities of valued products they could present as a gesture of respect. They were also to take twice the amount of silver. The money found in their sacks had to be returned, since its presence there had been an error they could not explain. They would carry payment for the new grain, as well as the silver from the first journey. Then Jacob told them to take Benjamin and return to the man. He placed the outcome beyond his own control. "May God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, so that he will release your other brother and Benjamin." Jacob did not name Simeon. He referred to him as the other brother, while Benjamin remained the son whose possible loss dominated the decision. Yet Jacob was finally allowing the journey required to recover both Simeon and food. "As for me," he said, "if I am bereaved, I am bereaved." The words did not express confidence that nothing would go wrong. They acknowledged that refusing to act would not protect the household. Jacob accepted the risk he had fought to avoid. The brothers gathered the gift, twice the silver, and Benjamin. Then they went down to Egypt and stood before Joseph. Joseph saw Benjamin with them. He immediately told the steward of his house to bring the men home, slaughter an animal, and prepare a meal. They would eat with Joseph at noon. The steward obeyed and led them to Joseph's house. But the invitation frightened the brothers. They believed they were being taken there because of the silver returned in their sacks. Instead of seeing the house as a place of hospitality, they saw it as the setting for an accusation. They said they were being brought inside so the Egyptians could attack them, overpower them, take them as slaves, and seize their donkeys. Their fear was shaped by what they knew. Egypt's governor had already accused them of spying and imprisoned them for 3 days. Simeon had remained behind in chains. Then every man had discovered his payment returned. Now, rather than conducting ordinary business at the grain distribution, they were being taken into the ruler's private residence. Before entering, they approached Joseph's steward at the doorway and tried to explain. They respectfully told him that they had come to Egypt once before to buy food. On the return journey, when they stopped for the night and opened their sacks, each man found his full amount of silver at the mouth of his bag. They had brought all of it back. They had also brought additional silver to buy more food. They did not know who had placed the first payment in their sacks. The steward answered, "Peace to you, do not be afraid." Then he gave an explanation the brothers had not expected. "Your God, the God of your father, gave you treasure in your sacks. I received your silver." He treated their first purchase as fully paid. Whatever they feared the return money proved, the official responsible for Joseph's house did not accuse them of theft. Then he brought Simeon out to them. The brother left behind in Egyptian confinement was returned alive. The condition attached to his release had been met. Benjamin stood among them. The steward led all the brothers into Joseph's house. He gave them water to wash their feet and provided food for their donkeys. When the brothers learned that they would eat there at noon, they prepared the gift Jacob had sent. Joseph came home at the appointed time. The brothers brought their gift into the house and bowed before him to the ground. Again, the family from Joseph's dreams lowered itself before him, now including Benjamin. But the brothers still saw only Egypt's governor. Joseph asked about their welfare. Then he asked about their elderly father, the man they had mentioned before. "Is he still alive?" They answered, "Your servant, our father, is well. He is still alive." Then they bowed again. Joseph had now heard directly that Jacob survived. The first journey had given him that information, but the answer was repeated in the presence of Benjamin and all the returning brothers. Jacob was far away in Canaan, waiting for sons he feared he might never see again, while Joseph stood close enough to ask after him without disclosing why the answer mattered. Then Joseph looked and saw Benjamin, his mother's son. He asked, "Is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about?" Before waiting for another explanation, Joseph spoke a blessing over him. "God be gracious to you, my son." Joseph was overcome with compassion for his brother and hurried out. He entered a private room and wept there. This was the second time Joseph turned away to weep during his dealings with the brothers. On the first journey, he had heard them confess their guilt in front of the ruler they did not know could understand them. Now he saw Benjamin, the one brother who had not taken part in selling him and the only other son of Rachel. But Joseph still did not reveal himself. After weeping, he washed his face, returned, and controlled himself. "Serve the meal," he ordered. The servants arranged separate tables. Joseph ate by himself. The brothers ate together. The Egyptians in the house also ate separately from both Joseph and his guests, because Egyptians would not eat with Hebrews. Such a meal was considered detestable to them. The arrangement displayed the divided identity of Joseph's life. He was Hebrew by birth and brother to the men visiting him. Yet he sat apart as an Egyptian ruler, surrounded by Egyptians who would not share a table with Hebrews. Joseph knew he belonged to the family across the room. Then the brothers were seated before him, according to age, from the firstborn to the youngest. They looked at one another in astonishment. The seating order was too exact to seem ordinary. 11 adult brothers had been arranged by birth without being told how the Egyptian household knew the sequence. The ruler who had questioned them about their family now appeared to know far more about that family than they had explained. Still, Joseph's identity remained hidden. Food was served to the brothers from Joseph's own table. Benjamin's portion was 5 times larger than the portion given to any of the others. Once again, visible preference separated one son of Rachel from the rest. Jacob's open favoritism toward Joseph had helped feed the brothers' hatred years earlier. They had seen Joseph's distinctive robe and could not speak peaceably to him. Now, in Joseph's house, Benjamin received a public distinction no one at the table could miss. The men ate and drank freely with Joseph. For one meal, fear gave way to celebration. Simeon was free. The returned silver had not produced an accusation. The governor had asked kindly about their father, blessed Benjamin, seated them with impossible precision, and fed them from his own table. Yet they still did not know why. Joseph had now seen Benjamin and heard again that Jacob was alive. He had watched the brothers return for Simeon rather than abandon him permanently. He had placed a favored younger brother before them, But a banquet inside Joseph's house did not yet show what they would do if leaving Egypt safely required them to sacrifice Benjamin. The brothers had once returned to Jacob without Joseph and protected themselves with a lie. Soon they would be given the opportunity to return without Rachel's other son. This time the danger would not begin with a visible robe. It would be hidden in Benjamin's sack. Before the brothers left, Joseph gave instructions to the steward of his house. "Fill the men's sacks with as much food as they can carry," he said, "and put each man's silver at the mouth of his sack." The returned payments would repeat what had happened after the first journey. But Joseph added one more instruction. "Put my cup, the silver one, at the mouth of the youngest brother's sack, along with his grain money." The steward did exactly as Joseph commanded. The men had eaten in Joseph's house and received grain. Simeon had been released. When morning came, they were sent away with their donkeys. They left the city carrying food for the household in Canaan. All 11 brothers were present. Judah's guarantee appeared close to fulfillment. He had only to bring Benjamin through the journey and set him safely before Jacob. The brothers had not traveled far when Joseph spoke again to his steward. "Get up and pursue those men. When you overtake them, say, 'Why have you repaid good with evil? Isn't this the cup my master drinks from and uses for divination? You have done evil in doing this.'" The accusation was designed around an object associated personally with Joseph. This was not an ordinary piece of silver that could be dismissed as a counting error. The steward would identify it as the governor's drinking cup and as an object connected with his ability to discover hidden things. The man who had already seated the brothers according to birth order would now appear able to expose a theft committed inside his own house. The steward overtook them and delivered Joseph's words. The brothers responded with disbelief. "Why does my lord say such things? Far be it from your servants to do anything like this." Then they appealed to their earlier conduct. They had brought back from Canaan the silver found at the mouth of their sacks. If they had voluntarily returned money no one had demanded from them, why would they steal silver or gold from the governor's house? Their reasoning was sound, according to everything they knew. They had gone to Joseph's home, afraid that the first silver would be used against them. They had explained it at the door and carried the full amount back. The steward himself had reassured them that he had received their payment. Now, that same steward accused them of taking something far more dangerous. Confident of their innocence, the brothers proposed severe terms. "If the cup is found with any one of your servants, let him die, and the rest of us will become my lord's slaves." Their answer placed every brother under the search. They declared themselves innocent and offered death for the man found with the cup and enslavement for the rest. The steward did not accept those exact terms. He said the person found with the cup would become his master's slave, but the others would be innocent. That adjustment defined the choice before the search began. The brothers had offered collective enslavement. The steward separated the group's fate from the fate of the one who possessed the cup. If it was found, the others would be free to continue home. Each man quickly lowered his sack to the ground and opened it. The steward began with the oldest brother and searched in order to the youngest. One after another, the steward found nothing but grain and returned silver. Reuben's sack did not contain the cup. Neither did Simeon's, Levi's, Judah's, or the sacks belonging to the others. The search continued until it reached Benjamin. The cup was found in his sack. The evidence appeared conclusive. The governor's own silver cup lay among Benjamin's possessions, exactly where the steward had said stolen property would be found. The brother Joseph had honored with the largest portion at the banquet now appeared to have repaid that favor by stealing from him. They watched the sacks opened and saw the silver cup emerge from Benjamin's bag. Under the steward's terms, Benjamin alone would remain as a slave, while the other brothers could continue toward Canaan. Instead, the brothers tore their clothes. Each man loaded his donkey, and all of them returned to the city with Benjamin. They carried the grain they had received, and Simeon traveled with them after his release. Years earlier, when Joseph was taken, the brothers had continued without him and carried his bloodied robe to Jacob. Now, when Benjamin was held under accusation, they turned back with him. The entire group reversed its journey and returned together, placing the brothers back before the governor who had ordered the pursuit. Judah and his brothers entered Joseph's house. Joseph was still there. They fell to the ground before him. The bowing continued, but the circumstances had changed. During the first journey, they had bowed as foreign buyers before Egypt's governor. At the banquet, they had bowed as guests presenting their father's gift. Now they bowed as accused men who had returned voluntarily with the brother marked for slavery. Joseph asked them, "What is this you have done?" Then he referred to the claim carried by his steward. "Didn't you know that a man like me can certainly practice divination?" The question reinforced the position Joseph had presented throughout their encounters. He had questioned them closely about their family. He had arranged them according to age. Now the cup hidden in Benjamin's sack had been discovered before they reached home. The brothers did not know the discovery had been planned by Joseph himself. To them, the governor appeared to possess an almost inescapable power to reveal what was hidden. Judah answered, "What can we say to my lord? What can we speak? How can we prove our innocence?" He did not accuse the steward of planting the cup. He did not blame Benjamin. He did not repeat the proposal that the person found with it should die. He admitted that the brothers had no answer capable of clearing them before Joseph. Then Judah said, "God has uncovered the iniquity of your servants." His statement reached deeper than the silver cup. Judah did not say that all the brothers had stolen it. They knew they had not. But they had already connected their distress in Egypt with the guilt they carried concerning Joseph. In the prison, they had said that trouble had come because they saw their brother's distress and would not listen. Reuben had said an accounting was being required for Joseph's blood. Now, standing before the unrecognized Joseph, Judah described their exposed condition as iniquity uncovered by God. The cup accusation was false, but the brothers were not innocent men in the fullest sense. The ruler before whom they bowed was alive only because the crime they had concealed had not ended as they expected. They could not see that connection, but Joseph could. Judah then offered collective submission. "We are now my lord's slaves," he said, "both we and the one in whose possession the cup was found." The steward had said the other brothers would be innocent. Judah refused that separation. He placed all of them beside Benjamin. This was not the guarantee he had made to Jacob. Judah had promised to bring Benjamin back and set him before his father. Becoming a slave in Egypt would not fulfill that promise, but abandoning Benjamin would violate it completely. With no argument that could disprove the evidence, Judah offered the one thing still available. The brothers would share Benjamin's sentence. Joseph rejected that proposal. "Far be it from me to do such a thing. Only the man in whose possession the cup had been found would become Joseph's slave. As for the rest of you, go back to your father in peace." The ruling was restrained according to the apparent offense. Joseph would not enslave men against whom no evidence had been found. He would hold Benjamin and release everyone else. But that restraint made the decision harder, not easier. Go back to your father in peace. It was the one thing Judah had already said he could not do. He stood before the ruler who had ordered his release, while Benjamin remained under sentence. To keep his word to Jacob, Judah would now have to answer a judgment supported by evidence he could not disprove. Judah stepped closer to Joseph. "Please, my lord, let your servant speak a word in your hearing. Do not be angry with your servant, for you are equal to Pharaoh." Judah recognized the power before him. The governor had authority to enslave Benjamin, release the others, or punish Judah for challenging the judgment. He therefore began with respect, but he did not leave. He returned to the questions Joseph had asked during their first journey. My lord asked his servants, "Do you have a father or a brother?" Judah repeated the answer they had given. Their father was an old man. He had a young son born in his old age. That son's brother was dead, and he alone remained of his mother's children. His father loved him. The description contained Joseph's own place within the family, as the brothers understood it. Joseph was the dead brother. Benjamin was the surviving son. Jacob's special love remained fixed on Rachel's children. Judah then reminded Joseph that the governor himself had ordered them to bring Benjamin so he could see him. The brothers had warned that the boy could not leave his father. If he left, his father would die. Joseph had refused their objection. "Unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you will not see my face again." Judah was not accusing Joseph of creating the famine or of forcing Jacob to favor Benjamin. He was laying out the chain of events that made the present sentence devastating. The governor had required Benjamin's presence. The brothers had carried that command home. Jacob had resisted, and only the need for food had overcome his refusal. Judah described that conversation. When they returned to their father, they told him what the governor had said. Later, when Jacob asked them to go back and buy a little food, they answered that they could not return unless Benjamin went with them. They would travel if their youngest brother accompanied them, but they could not see the man's face without him. Then Jacob had spoken about Rachel. "You know that my wife bore me 2 sons," he had said. "One went away from me, and I said, 'Surely he has been torn to pieces.' I have never seen him since." Joseph now heard what his father had said about his disappearance. Jacob believed Joseph had been torn apart and said he had never seen him since. The brothers standing before Joseph had allowed their father to carry that conclusion into old age. Judah continued with Jacob's warning, "If you take this one from me too, and harm comes to him, you will bring my gray hair down to the grave in sorrow." Joseph had already heard that Jacob was alive. Now he heard how Jacob's life had become bound to Benjamin after losing him. The survival of the father was not separate from the fate of the son Joseph had sentenced to remain. Judah brought the present danger back to Jacob. If he returned to Jacob without Benjamin, his father would see that the boy was gone. Jacob's life was bound up with Benjamin's life. The sight of the returning brothers without him would kill their father, and they would bring his gray hair down to the grave in sorrow. This was exactly the return Joseph had offered them. They could go back in peace, but Judah explained why no peace awaited them without Benjamin. Then he named his own obligation. Judah had personally guaranteed the boy's safety. He had told Jacob, "If I do not bring him back to you, I will bear the blame before my father all my life." His guarantee had now reached the moment when words required action. Judah could not put the responsibility on Reuben, Benjamin, or the governor. He had taken it upon himself before leaving Canaan. Then Judah made his offer. "Please let your servant remain instead of the boy as my lord's slave. Let the boy go back with his brothers." Years earlier, Judah had proposed that Joseph be sold as a slave while he and the other brothers returned home. Now Judah offered himself as a slave so Rachel's other son could return. He did not ask Joseph to overlook the cup or pretend no offense had occurred. He offered a substitute for the sentence. If the governor required a slave, Judah would remain. Benjamin would go free. Then Judah asked the question that completed his appeal. "How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me?" He could not bear to see the disaster that would fall upon his father. Judah's appeal centered not on his own future, but on Jacob's grief. The brother who had once participated in a deception that left Jacob mourning Joseph now refused to help create the same loss again. He was prepared to surrender his own freedom rather than return with another explanation for the disappearance of a favored son. Joseph had heard enough. He could no longer restrain himself in front of everyone attending him. "Have everyone leave me!" he cried. The Egyptian servants withdrew. No outsider remained in the room when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. Then he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and the report reached Pharaoh's household. The ruler who had questioned the brothers through an interpreter no longer concealed himself behind Egyptian office. "I am Joseph." Then he asked, "Is my father still alive?" The brothers could not answer him. They were terrified in his presence. In a single sentence, their understanding of everything collapsed. The governor who controlled their food was the brother they had sold. The man who imprisoned them had been the boy they threw into a pit. The Egyptian who listened while they confessed their guilt understood every word, because the guilt concerned him. They had bowed before Joseph repeatedly without recognizing the fulfillment of the dreams they hated. They had called themselves honest men before the one person who knew their deception. They had said their missing brother was no more, while that brother stood in front of them. Now Joseph held authority second only to Pharaoh, and they stood defenseless inside his house. Joseph told them to come closer. They approached. Then he spoke again, removing any possibility that they had misunderstood. "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt." He did not erase their deed. He identified himself through it. He was not merely a man who shared Joseph's name or an Egyptian claiming family connection. He was the brother they had sold. But Joseph did not follow that identification with a sentence of revenge. "Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here," he said, "for God sent me ahead of you to preserve life." Joseph held their action and God's action together without treating them as the same in moral character. The brothers had sold him. God had sent him ahead. Their deed had removed Joseph from his home through violence and profit. God had brought preservation through the path they intended for his ruin. Joseph explained the danger that made his position necessary. The famine had already lasted 2 years. 5 more years remained in which there would be no plowing or harvest. The family had not reached the end of the crisis. The grain they came to buy addressed immediate hunger, but the land would not recover the following season. Without sustained provision, Jacob's entire household, children, servants, and animals would be consumed by the remaining famine. "God sent me ahead of you," Joseph said again, "to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep you alive by a great deliverance." The purpose he described was not limited to preserving Egypt. Pharaoh's dreams had led to national preparation, and the storehouses had saved countless people. But Joseph now saw his position in direct relation to his own family. He had been placed where he could preserve the household from which he had been expelled. "So it was not you who sent me here, but God." Joseph was not denying the sale he had named only moments before. He was declaring that his brothers did not control the final meaning or outcome of what they had done. They intended to remove a dreamer. Their sale carried him toward the fulfillment of the dreams. They intended to reduce him to a slave. The years of slavery and prison placed him before the officials whose dreams eventually brought him to Pharaoh. They intended to separate him from Jacob's household. He now possessed the authority and food required to keep that household alive. God had made Joseph a father to Pharaoh, lord over Pharaoh's entire house, and ruler throughout Egypt. The brothers had known none of this when they entered the country. Now Joseph explained not only who he was, but why they had found him in this position. Then he gave them urgent instructions. "Hurry back to my father." They were to tell Jacob, "This is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Do not delay." Jacob would live in the region of Goshen, close to Joseph. He would bring his children, grandchildren, flocks, herds, and everything he owned. Joseph promised to provide for him there. 5 years of famine still remained. If Jacob stayed in Canaan, he and his household would fall into poverty. Egypt's grain had to be purchased and transported, and each journey exposed the family to greater need. In Goshen, Joseph could sustain them directly through the authority already placed in his hands. Then Joseph appealed to what the brothers could personally verify. Their own eyes saw him. Benjamin's eyes saw him. They could hear Joseph speaking directly with them. They were to tell Jacob about all Joseph's honor in Egypt and about everything they had witnessed. Then they were to bring their father down quickly. The task reversed the message the brothers had carried home years before. Then they had taken Joseph's robe and allowed Jacob to believe his son was dead. Now they would carry Joseph's own words and testify that he was alive. But Joseph did not leave the reconciliation at the level of instructions. He embraced Benjamin and Benjamin wept upon him. The two sons of Rachel, separated since Benjamin's childhood, now held one another in Egypt. Benjamin had entered Joseph's house as the brother threatened with slavery. He now knew that the ruler who had blessed him, favored him at the banquet, and placed the cup in his sack was Joseph. Then Joseph kissed all his brothers and wept over them. He did not embrace Benjamin alone. The brothers who had stripped him, ignored his pleas, sold him, and hidden the truth from Jacob were received with the same unmistakable act of family recognition. Only after that were his brothers able to speak with him. Their silence of terror gave way to conversation. Joseph was no longer addressing them as suspected spies through an interpreter. They could speak as brothers, though the years between them remained real, and the consequences of the famine were still advancing. The brothers now had to carry the news of Joseph to Jacob in Canaan. News of the reunion spread through Pharaoh's household. Joseph's brothers have come. Pharaoh and his servants were pleased. Pharaoh himself supported the plan to bring them into Egypt. He told Joseph to instruct the brothers to load their animals and return to Canaan. They were to bring their father and their households back. Pharaoh promised to give them the best part of Egypt, where they would eat from the abundance of the land. Then Pharaoh commanded Joseph to provide wagons from Egypt for the brothers' children and wives, and for their elderly father. They were not to worry about the possessions they could not bring. The best of all Egypt would be theirs. The offer gave Joseph's invitation the full support of the throne. Jacob's household would not arrive as an unauthorized group of hungry foreigners, depending only on a private favor. Pharaoh knew who they were and had ordered the resources needed for their migration. That distinction mattered because Joseph's family was large. Moving one elderly father would have been difficult enough. Moving sons, daughters, grandchildren, servants, flocks, herds, and household property required more than an emotional reunion. It required transport, food for the road, and an assured destination. Pharaoh provided all three through Joseph. The sons of Israel followed the instructions. Joseph gave them wagons according to Pharaoh's command and provisions for the journey. He also gave each brother a change of clothes. Clothing had marked crucial moments in Joseph's history. His distinctive robe had displayed Jacob's preference. His brothers stripped it from him, stained it with blood, and used it to make Jacob believe he was dead. In Potiphar's house, the garment Joseph abandoned while escaping became evidence in a false accusation. Now Joseph gave clothing rather than losing it. The brothers carried the clothing Joseph gave them when they returned to Jacob. Benjamin again received more than the others. Joseph gave him 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of clothes. The difference was unmistakable. Benjamin had received 5 times the food at the banquet. Now he received silver and 5 garments. But the brothers had already passed through the moment when abandoning Benjamin would have secured their freedom. They had torn their clothes and returned with him. Judah had offered to remain as a slave in his place. Benjamin's greater gift did not divide them on the journey out of Egypt. Joseph also sent provisions directly for Jacob. 10 male donkeys carried good things from Egypt. 10 female donkeys carried grain, bread, and other food for his father's journey. The animals and their loads were not merely evidence of Joseph's wealth. They addressed the exact obstacle that had brought the family to Egypt. Famine had emptied their supplies. Joseph was now sending enough food to sustain his father on the way to the country where further provision waited. Then Joseph sent his brothers away. As they departed, he told them, "Do not quarrel along the way." The instruction acknowledged a journey loaded with unresolved responsibility. The brothers had to return to the father they had deceived and explain that Joseph had been alive all these years. Each man knew his own part in the sale. Reuben had objected and later discovered the pit empty. Judah had proposed selling Joseph. All of them had lived inside the deception. Joseph did not send them home to decide who deserved the most blame. Their immediate task was to tell Jacob the truth and bring him quickly to Egypt. The brothers left Egypt and traveled to Canaan. When they reached Jacob, they announced, "Joseph is still alive, and he is ruler over all the land of Egypt." Jacob's heart became numb because he did not believe them. The message contradicted more than 20 years of settled grief. Jacob had personally identified Joseph's robe. He had concluded that a wild animal had devoured his son. His children had stood around him while he mourned and refused comfort. Now the same sons who returned without Joseph were telling Jacob not only that he lived, but that he governed Egypt. Their statement joined two claims that seemed impossible. Joseph had survived the fate Jacob imagined, and the 17-year-old shepherd had become the ruler who controlled the grain they brought home. The brothers repeated everything Joseph had said to them. They could tell Jacob what the governor knew about the family, how he had revealed himself, and how he had spoken of God sending him ahead to preserve life. They could describe his authority, his household, and his command that Jacob come without delay. Then Jacob saw the wagons Joseph had sent to carry him. The physical evidence gave substance to the words. These were Egyptian wagons sent under Pharaoh's authority. The animals loaded with provisions, the clothing, the gifts, and the grain all came from the world the brothers described. Joseph had known his elderly father would need transport, and the wagons had arrived for that purpose. Jacob's spirit revived. "It is enough," he said. "My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." The father who had once said he would descend to the grave, mourning Joseph, now prepared to descend into Egypt to see him alive. He knew enough to move. His son lived. Joseph had summoned him. The famine remained severe, and Egypt offered a place where the household could survive. Jacob began the journey with everything he had. When he reached Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. That night, God spoke to Israel in visions. "Jacob, Jacob." He answered, "Here I am." The response was the same simple readiness Joseph had shown years earlier when Jacob sent him to find his brothers. Now Jacob himself stood at the boundary of a far greater departure. God said, "I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation." The journey south would not cancel the future promised to Jacob's family. Egypt was not outside God's ability to preserve and multiply them. The country that offered refuge during famine would become the place where the household grew into a nation. God continued, "I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again." Jacob was not being asked to choose between going to Joseph and remaining with God. The God of his father would accompany him into Egypt. The family's descent would not be permanent abandonment of Canaan. Then came a promise directed to the reunion Jacob longed for. "Joseph's own hand will close your eyes." Jacob would see his son again. Joseph would be present at his death. The father who had mourned without a body would not die, separated from the son he believed had been torn apart. The vision answered the central fears attached to the journey. Jacob could enter Egypt without losing the promise, without leaving God's presence, and without treating the migration as the end of his family's future. God would make a great nation there and would bring them up again. Jacob rose from Beersheba. His sons placed him, their children, and their wives in the wagons Pharaoh had sent. The same royal government Joseph now served supplied the vehicles carrying Jacob toward him. The family also took their livestock and the possessions they had acquired in Canaan. Pharaoh had told them not to worry about what they left because Egypt's best would be available. But the household did not arrive empty. They brought the movable life they had built in the land, animals, goods, children, and dependents. Jacob took all his offspring with him into Egypt. His sons and grandsons traveled beside him. His daughters and granddaughters came as well. The entire household descended. This was no longer a temporary grain expedition by 10 brothers. It was a migration of the family whose survival had become tied to Joseph's position. The famine had turned repeated journeys into an unsustainable pattern. Joseph's revelation had turned Egypt from the land of an unknown governor into the home of Jacob's living son. Pharaoh's authorization had turned private rescue into an officially supported settlement. And the truth had finally moved beyond Joseph's house. Jacob now knew that Joseph lived. The brothers could no longer maintain the old deception. Benjamin and Simeon had returned safely. The wagons carried the family south beneath a promise that Egypt would not erase their future. Yet the distance between father and son had not closed. Jacob was on the road, surrounded by the household Joseph intended to preserve. Joseph remained in Egypt, governing a famine-stricken nation and waiting for the people whose arrival would change his Egyptian life again. For more than 20 years, Jacob had pictured Joseph only through loss. Now every turn of the wagon carried him toward the son he had never expected to see. The family entered Egypt together. But before they could be settled in the land Pharaoh had offered, Jacob and Joseph still had to stand face to face. Jacob's household entered Egypt through the families of his sons. Reuben, the firstborn, came with Hanok, Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. Simeon came with Jemuel, Jamin, Ohad, Jachin, Zohar, and Shaul, whose mother was a Canaanite woman. Levi brought the lines of Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Judah came with Shelah, Perez, and Zerah. His older sons Er and Onan had died in Canaan. Perez already had 2 sons of his own, Hezron and Hamul. Issachar came with Tola, Puvah, Job, and Shimron. Zebulun came with Sered, Elon, and Jalil. These sons and grandchildren, together with Jacob's daughter Dinah, formed the branch descended through Leah. That branch numbered 33. Gad came with Ziphion, Haggi, Shuni, Esbon, Eri, Arodi, and Areli. Asher came with Imnah, Ishva, Ishvi, and Beriah, as well as their sister Sarah. Beriah's sons Heber and Malkiel added another generation. Gad and Asher carried the branch descended through Zilpah, numbering 16. Rachel's branch included Joseph and Benjamin. Joseph's sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, had already been born in Egypt through Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. Benjamin came with Bela, Becher, Ashbel, Gera, Naaman, Ahi, Rosh, Muppim, Huppim, and Ard. Rachel's branch numbered 14. Dan and Naphtali carried the families descended through Bilhah. Dan came with Hushim. Naphtali came with Jahzeel, Guni, Jezer, and Shillem. Their branch numbered 7. Altogether, 66 direct descendants traveled into Egypt with Jacob, apart from the wives of his sons. Joseph and his 2 sons were already there. With Jacob included, the household numbered 70. Joseph's Egyptian-born sons were counted within the same household as the relatives arriving from Canaan. Their birthplace and their mother's Egyptian family did not place them outside Jacob's descendants. Manasseh and Ephraim belonged inside the family, now gathering in Egypt. Several generations were moving at once. Jacob traveled with sons who had families of their own, grandchildren who had already become fathers, and young dependents who needed food. The household also brought the flocks, herds, and possessions acquired in Canaan. This was no longer a group of brothers making a temporary journey for grain. The family needed a place where multiple households could remain together, and their livestock required pasture as well as shelter. Jacob sent Judah ahead to Joseph to receive directions for Goshen. Judah went before the family so Joseph could direct them into the region prepared for their arrival. His task gave the advancing household a specific destination rather than leaving the families and animals to enter Egypt without direction. The household then reached the land of Goshen. Joseph prepared his chariot and went there to meet his father. Joseph appeared before Jacob, embraced him, and wept on his neck for a long time. For more than 20 years, Jacob had believed Joseph was dead. He had identified the bloodied robe, concluded that an animal had torn his son apart, and mourned without hope of seeing him alive. Now Joseph stood before him. Jacob said, "Now I am ready to die, since I have seen your face and know that you are still alive." Jacob was not announcing that death would come immediately. He was saying that the longing that brought him into Egypt had been fulfilled. He had wanted to see Joseph before he died, and now he had seen him. But the reunited family still needed a recognized place within Egypt. Joseph explained what he would do next. He would go to Pharaoh and announce that his brothers and his father's household had arrived from Canaan. He would tell Pharaoh that the men were shepherds and livestock keepers, and that they had brought their flocks, herds, and everything they owned. Then Joseph prepared his brothers for the question Pharaoh would ask. When Pharaoh calls you and asks, "What is your occupation?" you shall say, "Your servants have been keepers of livestock from our youth until now, both we and our fathers." That answer would allow them to live in Goshen, because shepherds were detestable to the Egyptians. Joseph did not tell his brothers to hide their work. He told them to identify it clearly. Their occupation distinguished them from the Egyptians and directed Pharaoh toward the region suited to their animals. The family's livelihood depended on livestock. They had carried their flocks and herds into Egypt, and the famine had left them without pasture in Canaan. Goshen offered the kind of land their work required. Their answer would establish that this was not a new occupation adopted after entering Egypt. They and their fathers had kept livestock from their youth. The work belonged to the household across generations. Joseph went to Pharaoh. "My father and my brothers have come from Canaan," he reported. "Their flocks, their herds, and everything they own are with them, and they are now in Goshen." Then Joseph selected 5 of his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. Pharaoh asked, "What is your occupation?" The brothers answered, "Your servants are shepherds, both we and our fathers." They also explained why they had come. They had entered Egypt to live there because the famine was severe in Canaan. There was no pasture for their flocks. "Please let your servants settle in the land of Goshen." Their request presented the family as sojourners, dependent on Pharaoh's permission. They did not claim Egyptian land as their own. They asked for a place where their households and animals could survive. Pharaoh turned to Joseph. "Your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you." He authorized Joseph to settle them in the best part of the country. Let them live in the land of Goshen. Then Pharaoh added that if Joseph knew capable men among his brothers, he should place them in charge of Pharaoh's own livestock. Pharaoh's answer addressed more than the immediate need for pasture. He granted the family a place in Egypt's best available region and recognized that their skill with animals could be used in service of the crown. The brothers' occupation separated them from ordinary Egyptian society, but Pharaoh also treated their skill as useful. Men experienced with livestock could be appointed over animals belonging to him. The family had arrived asking for pasture. Pharaoh gave them access to Egypt's best available land and opened a path for qualified members of the household to serve him. Joseph then brought Jacob before Pharaoh. Jacob blessed Pharaoh. The elderly foreigner stood before the ruler whose grain and permission had preserved his household. Yet Jacob entered with words of blessing. Pharaoh asked him, "How many are the years of your life?" Jacob answered, "The years of my sojourning are 130. He called those years few and difficult, and said they had not reached the years of his fathers during their sojourning. Jacob's life had been long, but Abraham and Isaac had lived longer. At 130, Jacob still described himself as a sojourner, rather than a man who had reached permanent possession. He had left Canaan because famine threatened his family. He now stood in Egypt, depending on Pharaoh's welcome. Yet God had promised to accompany him into Egypt and eventually bring the family up again. Jacob blessed Pharaoh once more and left his presence. He had entered with a blessing and departed with one. Pharaoh had asked about Jacob's years, and Jacob answered as a man whose long life remained a sojourn. With Pharaoh's authorization secured, Joseph settled his father and brothers in Egypt. He gave them property in the best part of the land, in the district of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had commanded. The district lay within the region prepared for their settlement. There the family had room for its households and pasture for its livestock. They were not merely allowed to camp near Egyptian grain until the immediate shortage passed. Joseph established them with property in the land Pharaoh had granted, giving the growing household a defined place during the continuing famine. Joseph also provided food for his father, his brothers, and his father's entire household according to the number of their dependents. His provision matched the size of each household, including the children. Jacob had arrived with sons, grandchildren, and a wider company of people who relied on them. Joseph supplied the bread required to sustain them. The family's position had now changed from repeated emergency journeys to an organized life in Egypt. They no longer had to send brothers south each time their grain disappeared. They possessed land in Goshen, remained near Joseph, and received food through him. Jacob had seen the son he believed was dead. Joseph's brothers had been recognized before Pharaoh as shepherds rather than treated as spies. The children and grandchildren who entered Egypt now had a defined place in which to live. Joseph's authority had transformed a displaced household into a protected community. But the famine was still advancing. The land granted to Jacob's family gave them pasture and shelter, while Joseph's provision gave them food. Outside Goshen, Egypt and Canaan continued weakening under the same scarcity. Joseph had secured his family's survival. He now had to govern what happened as the rest of the country exhausted its money, livestock, land, and labor in exchange for grain. There was no food throughout the region because the famine was extremely severe. Egypt and Canaan both weakened under it. The stored grain prevented immediate destruction, but the people still had to obtain it from Pharaoh's reserves. Joseph collected the money paid for grain throughout Egypt and Canaan and brought it into Pharaoh's treasury. Year after year of famine changed the meaning of wealth. Silver retained value only while there was food available to purchase. The population exchanged money for the grain required to remain alive, and eventually the money in Egypt and Canaan was exhausted. The Egyptians came to Joseph. "Give us food," they said. "Why should we die in front of you? Our money is gone." Joseph did not give them an empty reassurance. He named the next exchange by which food would be distributed. "If your money is gone, bring your livestock. I will give you food in exchange for your animals." The people brought their livestock to Joseph. They exchanged horses, flocks, herds, and donkeys for food. Joseph supplied them with grain for that year in exchange for the animals. The famine was steadily transferring the resources of Egypt to Pharaoh. First, the silver used for grain entered the royal treasury. Then the livestock passed into royal ownership. Joseph administered each stage because Pharaoh had placed the food reserves under his authority. For the people, these were not ordinary commercial decisions made during prosperity. Food had become the condition for continued life. Their other resources could not replace a failed harvest. The population surrendered them to obtain grain. That year ended, but the famine did not. The following year, the people returned to Joseph and stated their condition without concealing anything. They said their money was gone and their livestock now belonged to Joseph's master. Nothing remained to offer except their bodies and their land. "Why should we die before your eyes?" they asked, "both we and our land. If the people died, the fields would become desolate with them." They therefore proposed the next transfer themselves. "Buy us and our land in exchange for food. We and our land will become servants to Pharaoh." Then they asked Joseph to provide seed so they could live and not die, and so the land would not become desolate. Their request looked beyond the immediate distribution of stored grain. The famine would end, and fields would need to be planted again. Survival required both food for the present and seed for renewed agriculture. Joseph purchased all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. The Egyptians sold their fields because the famine was overpowering them. Property that had belonged to individual households became the property of the crown. Joseph also brought the people into service under Pharaoh and moved them into cities throughout the country. Egypt's economic order was being remade around the grain Joseph had stored. Pharaoh already held political authority. Through the famine exchange, he gained the nation's money, livestock, land, and service. One group remained exempt. Joseph did not purchase the land belonging to the priests. Pharaoh provided the priests with a fixed allowance, and they lived on that allotment during the famine. Because their food came from Pharaoh, they did not need to sell their land. After purchasing the people and their land, Joseph addressed the future. "Today I have bought you and your land for Pharaoh," he told them. "Here is seed for you, so you can plant the ground." Joseph did not leave the acquired fields unused or keep the population dependent only on grain already stored. He returned seed to the people and established the terms under which cultivation would resume. At harvest, 1/5 of the produce would belong to Pharaoh. The remaining 4/5 would belong to the people. They would use it as seed for the fields and as food for themselves, their households, and their children. The arrangement made Pharaoh the owner and continuing beneficiary of Egypt's agricultural land. It also gave the farmers the majority of the harvest needed to maintain production and feed their families. The people answered Joseph, "You have saved our lives." They asked to find favor in his sight and accepted their new status as Pharaoh's servants. They did not deny the extent of what they had surrendered. They had named it themselves. Their money was gone, their livestock belonged to Pharaoh, and their land and labor were now being acquired. Yet they also recognized that Joseph had kept them alive and provided seed for the land. Joseph made the 5th into a permanent statute over Egyptian land. Pharaoh would receive 1/5 of the harvest. The land of the priests alone did not become Pharaoh's property. The national consequences of Joseph's administration therefore lasted beyond the emergency that produced them. The storehouses had preserved Egypt during famine. The method of distribution had also centralized ownership under Pharaoh and established an enduring claim on future harvests. Joseph's rise to rule was not a ceremonial reward detached from difficult decisions. He had to govern abundance when no shortage was visible, famine when people cried for food, and the transfer of a nation's resources when its population had nothing left but land and labor. The plan he proposed in Pharaoh's court became a 14-year responsibility, with effects far beyond the opening and closing of storehouses. Throughout that process, Joseph remained Pharaoh's servant. He collected money for Pharaoh, acquired livestock and land for Pharaoh, and established Pharaoh's 5th. His authority was immense, but it operated beneath the throne that had placed the signet in his hand. Against the desperation of the surrounding country, Jacob's family experienced a sharply different outcome. Israel settled in Egypt, in the land of Goshen. The family acquired property there. They were fruitful and multiplied greatly. Joseph fed them according to the number of their dependents, and Pharaoh had granted them the best available region for their work. In Goshen, they gained property and became increasingly numerous. This contrast was one of the direct consequences of Joseph's position. The Egyptians came to him until they had surrendered their silver, animals, fields, and labor. Joseph's own family came to him and received food, property, and room to grow. The difference did not result from anything the brothers had done to deserve Joseph's protection. They were alive in Goshen because the brother they sold had refused to use power for revenge. Joseph had interpreted his survival as the means by which God preserved life, and he acted on that understanding by sustaining the household. Jacob lived in Egypt for 17 years, and his total life reached 147 years. As the time of his death drew near, he called for Joseph. The father who had once sent Joseph out to check on his brothers now summoned him for a final responsibility. This time the matter concerned what would happen to Jacob's body after death. Jacob asked Joseph to place his hand under his thigh. "If I have found favor in your sight," Jacob said, "deal with me in steadfast love and faithfulness." Then he stated the request: "Do not bury me in Egypt." Jacob had lived there for 17 years. Egypt had preserved his household, restored Joseph to him, and provided the land in which his descendants were multiplying. Yet Jacob did not want his burial to identify Egypt as the final home of his family. He wanted to lie with his fathers. "When I rest with my fathers," he told Joseph, "carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place." Joseph answered, "I will do as you have said." Jacob required more. "Swear to me." Joseph swore. The oath meant that Joseph would eventually have to use his Egyptian authority to carry Jacob's body out of the country Pharaoh had allowed the family to enter. Jacob did not entrust the task to all his sons as an undefined family wish. He placed it directly on Joseph, the son with the power to fulfill it. Then Israel bowed in worship at the head of his bed. The movement joined physical weakness with deliberate confirmation. Jacob had received Joseph's word and oath. His body would not remain in Egypt. The burial request also clarified the family's relationship to its new security. Goshen was a place of preservation, growth, and property. It was not the destination Jacob chose for his grave. His descendants were becoming established in Egypt, but his burial would point them back toward Canaan. Joseph now carried obligations in two directions. As Egypt's governor, he had preserved the country and administered the settlement created by famine. As Jacob's son, he had sworn to remove his father's body from that same country when the time came. The famine had reached its great economic consequence. Pharaoh held the land, the people had seed and an established share of future harvests, and Israel's household was secure in Goshen. But Jacob's remaining work was more personal and no less consequential. His death was approaching, and burial was only one matter that had to be ordered. Joseph had two Egyptian-born sons, whose place within the family had not yet been formally established by Jacob. The brothers whose choices had shaped Joseph's life still waited to hear what their father would say over them. Before Jacob could be carried to the burial place of his fathers, he would define inheritance across generations and speak over the sons gathered around him. Sometime later, Joseph was told that his father was ill. He took his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and went to Jacob. When Jacob heard that Joseph had come, he gathered his strength and sat up in bed. His body was failing, but he prepared to speak over Joseph and the two sons born to him in Egypt. Joseph had come because of Jacob's illness, and he brought both sons into the meeting. What Jacob said would therefore reach 3 generations at once: Jacob, Joseph, and the boys, through whom Joseph's place in the family would continue. Jacob began by recalling God's appearance to him at Luz in the land of Canaan. "God Almighty appeared to me there and blessed me." Then Jacob repeated the promise he had received. "Behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply you. I will make you into an assembly of peoples, and I will give this land to your descendants after you as an everlasting possession. Jacob's family was now living in Egypt, where it had received food, land, and protection. But the inheritance Jacob described remained connected to Canaan. The promise concerned more than Jacob's own lifetime. It reached forward to his descendants, the very people whose place he was about to define. That promise formed the basis for what he said next. Your 2 sons, who were born to you in Egypt before I came to you here, are mine. Jacob named Ephraim and Manasseh. They will be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon are mine. This was more than an expression of affection toward grandchildren. Jacob was formally taking Joseph's 2 sons into his own generation of the family. Ephraim and Manasseh would no longer stand only beneath Joseph as grandsons receiving whatever passed through their father. They would hold places alongside Jacob's own sons and receive inheritance among them. By adopting both boys, Jacob gave Joseph's line 2 distinct places within Israel. Joseph would not be represented through only one son, bearing one share. Manasseh and Ephraim would each stand as a branch of Jacob's household. Jacob compared them specifically with Reuben and Simeon, his first 2 sons. The comparison gave Ephraim and Manasseh direct standing among the sons from whom the family's divisions would descend. They were not being added after those divisions as a single smaller branch under Joseph's name. Jacob then explained what would happen if Joseph had more children. Any sons born to Joseph after Ephraim and Manasseh would remain Joseph's. In matters of inheritance, however, they would be called by the names of their brothers. The arrangement established where future descendants would belong. Ephraim and Manasseh would provide the 2 recognized names through which Joseph's family received its place. This meant Jacob's adoption affected more than the 2 boys standing before him. It established how Joseph's later descendants would be counted. They would receive their place through Ephraim or Manasseh when inheritance was assigned. The boys had been born in Egypt to Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, a priest of On. Jacob now claimed them as his own and connected them directly to the promise of fruitfulness, peoplehood, and land. Joseph's residence in Egypt did not exclude his children from Jacob's inheritance. Their birth before Jacob's arrival gave them the exact place Jacob now addressed. These 2 sons were to become his, like Reuben and Simeon. Then Jacob spoke about Rachel. He remembered the journey from Paddan and the death that occurred after he entered Canaan. As I was returning from Paddan, Rachel died beside me in the land of Canaan while we were still some distance from Ephrath. Jacob had buried her there on the road to Ephrath, that is, Bethlehem. Jacob placed that memory within the same conversation in which he adopted Joseph's sons. Joseph was Rachel's son. Now Manasseh and Ephraim were being received into Jacob's family with the standing of sons, rather than remaining only grandsons. Rachel had died before seeing the household Joseph later formed in Egypt. Jacob now held before him the 2 boys born through that household, and gave both a place within the family's future. Then Jacob saw Joseph's sons and asked, "Who are these?" His eyesight had become weak with age, so he could not see clearly. Joseph answered, "They are my sons, whom God has given me here." Joseph identified both the giver and the place. These were the sons God had given him in Egypt. Jacob said, "Bring them to me, please, so that I may bless them." Joseph brought the boys near. Jacob kissed them and embraced them. Then he spoke to Joseph. "I never expected to see your face again, and now God has allowed me to see your children as well." Jacob had once believed that seeing Joseph again was impossible. Now Joseph stood beside his bed with 2 sons old enough to receive their own places within the family. The restoration extended beyond father and son. Jacob was holding a generation he had never expected Joseph to have. Joseph moved the boys from their position near Jacob's knees and bowed with his face to the ground. The sequence gave the blessing a formal shape. Jacob first embraced the boys. Joseph then drew them back, bowed before his father, and brought them forward in the order he had chosen. Joseph took both sons, placing Ephraim at his own right hand toward Jacob's left, and Manasseh at his own left hand toward Jacob's right. Manasseh was the firstborn. Joseph's arrangement placed him where Jacob's right hand would naturally rest. Ephraim, the younger, stood opposite Jacob's left. Joseph then brought them near his father, but Jacob crossed his hands. He stretched out his right hand and placed it on Ephraim's head, even though Ephraim was younger. He placed his left hand on Manasseh's head, crossing his arms as he reached toward the boys. The boys remained in the positions Joseph had assigned. Jacob changed the result by changing his own hands. His right hand crossed toward the younger son, while his left reached toward the firstborn. Jacob knew that Manasseh was the firstborn. The placement of his hands was deliberate. Then Jacob blessed Joseph through the sons beneath his hands. Although Jacob's hands rested on Ephraim and Manasseh, the blessing was spoken as a blessing of Joseph. Joseph's future within the family was being carried forward through the two sons Jacob had just adopted. Jacob spoke first of the God before whom Abraham and Isaac had walked. The blessing connected Ephraim and Manasseh to generations that preceded their birth in Egypt. They were being placed within the family whose history reached through Jacob and Isaac to Abraham. Then Jacob described God as the one who had shepherded him throughout his life to that day. Jacob and his sons had lived as shepherds, and the family had identified that occupation before Pharaoh. Now Jacob described God as the shepherd who had sustained him through all his years. He also spoke of the angel who had redeemed him from all evil. May he bless these boys. Then Jacob asked that his name and the names of Abraham and Isaac be carried forward through them. Let my name be named upon them, and the names of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac. The adoption and blessing now came together. Jacob was not simply wishing the boys long life or prosperity. He placed the family name upon them. He asked that Ephraim and Manasseh increase greatly upon the earth. The blessing therefore joined identity and multiplication. The boys would carry the names attached to the promise, and their descendants would grow. Joseph's sons were being treated as bearers of Israel's future. Jacob's name would continue through them. The names of Abraham and Isaac would be invoked over them. Their inheritance would be connected to the land promised to that family. Joseph watched his father's hands. When he saw that Jacob had placed his right hand on Ephraim's head, he was displeased. Joseph took hold of Jacob's right hand and tried to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's. "Not this way, my father," Joseph said. "This one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." Joseph identified Manasseh's status and attempted to place the leading hand upon him, but Jacob refused. "I know, my son, I know." Jacob understood that Manasseh was older. His response made the choice explicit. Manasseh would also become a people, and he too would become great. Jacob did not remove him from the blessing, deny his adoption, or erase his future. But his younger brother will become greater than he, and his offspring will become a multitude of nations. The difference between the boys was now stated openly. Manasseh remained blessed, but Ephraim was placed before him. Jacob's decision did not depend on concealing one boy's identity beneath the other. Joseph named the firstborn directly. Jacob acknowledged that he knew and maintained the crossed position of his hands. Then Jacob blessed them that day. He said that Israel would use Ephraim and Manasseh as examples when speaking blessing. "By you, Israel will pronounce blessings, saying, 'May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh.'" Again, Jacob named Ephraim first. The order appeared when Jacob first claimed the boys, when he crossed his hands, when he answered Joseph's objection, and when he gave the words by which Israel would bless. Both sons received what Joseph had brought them to receive. Both were adopted by Jacob. Both carried the family name. Both were promised descendants and greatness. Yet the younger was deliberately placed before the older. Jacob's weak eyesight did not determine the result. He knew which son was firstborn, resisted Joseph's attempt to move his hand, and explained the future he assigned to each. Then Jacob spoke directly to Joseph about what lay beyond his own death. "I am about to die, but God will be with you and bring you back to the land of your fathers." Joseph's office, wife, sons, and responsibilities were in Egypt. Jacob assured him that the family's future would not remain permanently separated from the ancestral land. The promise joined this meeting to the words Jacob had spoken at its beginning. God had promised Canaan to his descendants as an everlasting possession. Now Jacob said God would be with Joseph's family and bring them back there. Egypt had preserved the household during famine. It had given Joseph authority and had given Jacob's descendants room to multiply. But Egypt was not the final land Jacob named over them. Then Jacob gave Joseph an additional portion beyond what he gave his brothers. "I give you one portion more than your brothers." Jacob described it as the portion he had taken from the Amorites with his sword and bow. The gift attached Joseph personally to an inheritance beyond the Egyptian land he governed. Pharaoh had placed Joseph over Egypt, but Jacob gave him a portion tied to the land of his fathers. This gift was distinct from the adoption itself. Ephraim and Manasseh had each received standing within Jacob's family. Joseph now received an additional portion, named directly as greater than what Jacob gave his brothers. The additional portion also made Jacob's assurance of return tangible. He did not speak of the ancestral land only as a distant idea. He assigned Joseph a particular inheritance connected to it. The meeting had therefore settled both identity and inheritance. Ephraim and Manasseh had entered as Joseph's sons, born in Egypt. Jacob claimed them as his own. He placed his name and the names of Abraham and Isaac upon them, and declared that they would multiply. Joseph had arranged them according to birth order. Jacob crossed his hands, resisted Joseph's correction, and placed the younger before the older without removing the firstborn from blessing. Then Jacob assured Joseph that God would remain with the family and bring them back to the land of their fathers. Joseph and his sons had received their place, their blessing, and their connection to the promised land. But Jacob had spoken only over Joseph's branch. His remaining sons still waited to hear what their father would say over the whole family before he died. Jacob called all his sons together. "Gather around," he said, "so I can tell you what will happen to you in the days to come." Then he called them to assemble and listen, to hear Israel, their father. The names Jacob spoke belonged to individual sons, but his words reached beyond their private lives into the families that would descend from them. Each man stood before him carrying a history already formed by character, failure, violence, endurance, or responsibility. Jacob began with Reuben. "You are my firstborn, my strength, and the first fruits of my vigor." By birth, Reuben held the place of greatest dignity and power, but Jacob did not confirm that expectation. "Turbulent as water, you will not excel." Then he named the act that had disqualified Reuben from preeminence. Reuben had entered his father's bed and defiled it. His firstborn status remained a fact, but it did not guarantee lasting leadership. Reuben had tried to rescue Joseph from the pit, yet he had not been able to control his brothers or carry out his own plan. He had later offered the lives of his sons as security for Benjamin, but Jacob rejected the proposal. Now the dignity associated with his birth passed without becoming the leading blessing. Jacob turned to Simeon and Levi together. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their weapons are instruments of violence. Their unity had expressed itself destructively. Jacob refused to join their council or be united with their assembly. In anger, they had killed men, and in self-will, they had injured animals. Jacob did not curse the sons themselves. He cursed their anger because it was fierce, and their wrath because it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. The two brothers had acted together in violence. Their consequence would be dispersion among the family that descended from Jacob. Then Jacob spoke to Judah. The tone changed immediately. Judah, your brothers will praise you. Judah's name was connected with praise, and Jacob declared that praise would come from his brothers. Judah's hand would be on the neck of his enemies, and his father's sons would bow before him. This was a striking word within a family whose early conflict centered on bowing. Joseph's dreams had shown his brothers bowing to him, and those dreams had been fulfilled in Egypt. Yet Jacob now spoke of his sons bowing before Judah as he described the future leadership of the family. Judah's place had not been established by firstborn status. 3 older brothers stood before him. Reuben had lost preeminence through instability. Simeon and Levi had been condemned for violence. Judah had also failed severely. He proposed selling Joseph, withheld Shelah from Tamar, and pronounced judgment before recognizing his own seal and staff. But Judah had acknowledged Tamar's greater righteousness. During the famine, he guaranteed Benjamin's safety, spoke for the brothers, and offered himself as a slave in Benjamin's place. Jacob compared him to a lion's cub returning from prey. Judah crouched like a lion, and no one would dare rouse him. Then Jacob spoke of rule. The scepter would not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until the one associated with it came, and the obedience of peoples belonged to him. The images placed enduring authority within Judah's line. Jacob was not describing only victory over one enemy. He spoke of a ruler's staff, a continuing claim to command, and peoples offering obedience. The blessing then shifted into images of extraordinary abundance. Judah would tie a donkey to a vine and a colt to a choice vine. Vines would be so plentiful that valuable growth could be treated like an ordinary hitching place. Wine would be abundant enough for garments to be washed in it. His eyes would be dark with wine, and his teeth white with milk. Leadership and prosperity came together in Jacob's words over Judah. Next came Zebulun. Jacob said Zebulun would live by the seashore and become a haven for ships, with his territory extending toward Sidon. Then Jacob spoke of Issachar. He compared him to a strong donkey resting between loads. Issachar would see that his resting place was good and the land pleasant. He would bend his shoulder to the burden and become subject to forced labor. Strength, productive land, rest, and service were joined in the same image. The animal was powerful, but its strength was placed beneath a load. Dan would judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Though Dan was a son of Bilhah, rather than Leah or Rachel, his descendants would stand as a full tribe among Jacob's people. Jacob compared him to a serpent beside the road, a viper along the path that bites a horse's heels and sends its rider backward. Dan's power would not depend on size or direct confrontation. The small creature at the roadside could overturn a mounted man by striking the animal beneath him. At that point, Jacob spoke a brief appeal directly to God. "I wait for your salvation, Lord." Then he continued with Gad. Raiders would attack Gad, but Gad would attack them at their heels. The word over him accepted conflict without allowing attack to become the conclusion. He would be pressed by raiding forces and would strike back. Asher's food would be rich, and he would provide delicacies fit for a king. His future was described through agricultural abundance, refined enough to reach royal tables. Naphtali was compared to a doe set free, with beauty coming from him. The image carried freedom, speed, and grace, rather than confinement beneath another's burden. Then Jacob came to Joseph. His words over Joseph were longer and more richly layered than those spoken over most of the brothers. Joseph is a fruitful branch, a fruitful branch beside a spring whose branches climb over a wall. The son Jacob believed dead had become fruitful in a foreign land. Joseph had named Ephraim in recognition that God made him fruitful in the land of his affliction. Now Jacob used the same central image. Joseph was not a plant barely surviving dry ground. He was rooted beside a source of water, growing beyond the barrier around him. The wall had not stopped the branches. Neither had Joseph's forced movement beyond Canaan ended his place within the family. His fruitfulness crossed the division between lands. Manasseh and Ephraim had been born in Egypt, yet Jacob had claimed them as his own sons. Then the blessing acknowledged the attacks Joseph had endured. Archers attacked him bitterly. They shot at him and harassed him. Jacob did not describe Joseph's rise as an easy unfolding of favor. Hostility had been real. His brothers hated him, stripped him, ignored his pleas, and sold him. Potiphar's wife accused him falsely. He was imprisoned and forgotten. But Joseph's bow remained steady, and his arms were made strong. Jacob identified the source of that strength, the mighty one of Jacob, the shepherd and rock of Israel. The same God Jacob had called his lifelong shepherd was named as the one who sustained Joseph. Joseph's success in Potiphar's house, his authority in prison, his interpretation before Pharaoh, and his administration of Egypt had not depended on circumstances remaining favorable. The Lord had been with him as circumstances repeatedly collapsed. Jacob continued by invoking the God of Joseph's father, who would help him, and God Almighty, who would bless him. The blessing extended through every part of creation important to life. Blessings from heaven above, blessings from the deep beneath, and blessings of breast and womb. Joseph's future included rainfall, water, fertility, nourishment, and descendants. The branch beside the spring would continue producing. Jacob said his own blessings surpassed the blessings of his ancestors and reached to the bounty of the everlasting hills. Then he placed those blessings upon Joseph's head, upon the crown of the one distinguished from his brothers. Joseph had been separated from them first through violence. His brothers removed him because they rejected the distinction Jacob had placed on him. In Egypt, Joseph became distinguished in another sense, elevated above the same brothers and given power to preserve them. Now Jacob openly placed the abundance of his blessing upon Joseph, yet Joseph's greatness did not cancel Judah's leadership. The family's future was not reduced to one son winning everything while the others disappeared. Joseph received fruitfulness, strength, help, and a double place through Ephraim and Manasseh. Judah received the language of praise, the lion, the scepter, and the ruler's staff. Jacob's words allowed both to stand. Joseph's extraordinary authority in Egypt fulfilled the dreams that had brought conflict into the family. Judah's line received a separate promise of continuing rule. Finally, Jacob spoke over Benjamin. He compared him to a ravenous wolf. In the morning he would devour prey, and in the evening he would divide the spoil. Benjamin had entered Egypt as the protected youngest son, whose safety governed Jacob's decisions. Yet Jacob's final image did not portray him as weak or passive. His descendants were associated with fierce action and victory. These were the 12 sons of Jacob, the fathers of the tribes of Israel. Jacob blessed them, giving each a blessing appropriate to him. He did not speak as though their pasts were interchangeable. Reuben heard about instability. Simeon and Levi heard judgment upon their anger. Judah heard praise and rule. Joseph heard fruitfulness after attack. Each word preserved distinctions within one family. Then Jacob returned to the matter of his burial. "I am about to be gathered to my people," he told them. "Bury me with my fathers in the cave in the field of Ephron the Hittite." He identified the place carefully. The cave was in the field at Machpelah, east of Mamre, in the land of Canaan. Abraham had purchased the field from Ephron as property for a burial place. Abraham and Sarah were buried there. Isaac and Rebekah were buried there. Jacob had buried Leah there. Rachel's grave remained on the road to Bethlehem, but Leah rested in the family tomb. Jacob now instructed all his sons to carry him to that same place. He repeated that the field and cave had been purchased from the Hittites. The burial site was not an undefined location held only through memory. It was family property in the land promised to their descendants. Jacob had already required Joseph to swear that he would not bury him in Egypt. Now he gave the complete instruction to all the sons gathered around him. The command joined the divided branches of the family in one future obligation. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Joseph, Benjamin, and the others had received different words, but all would share responsibility for carrying their father out of Egypt. That journey would also reverse the migration made during famine. Jacob had entered Egypt alive in Pharaoh's wagons because Joseph's position preserved him. His sons would carry his body back to Canaan because his identity and expectation remained tied to the land of his fathers. Egypt had been generous to Jacob's household. Pharaoh gave them Goshen. Joseph provided food. The family acquired property and multiplied. But Jacob did not choose an Egyptian tomb. When he finished giving these instructions, Jacob drew his feet up into the bed. Then he breathed his last and was gathered to his people. Joseph threw himself upon his father, wept over him, and kissed him. Then he ordered the physicians in his service to embalm Jacob. The physicians embalmed Israel, and the process required 40 days. The Egyptians mourned Jacob for 70 days. The length of the preparation and mourning delayed the journey Jacob had commanded, but it also preserved his body for the burial outside Egypt. Joseph remained responsible for carrying out the oath after the national mourning had ended. When the period of mourning ended, Joseph addressed Pharaoh's household. "If I have found favor in your sight, please speak to Pharaoh for me." Then he explained the oath Jacob had required. "My father made me swear. He said, 'I am about to die. Bury me in the tomb I prepared for myself in the land of Canaan. Now let me go up and bury my father, and then I will return.'" Joseph presented the burial as a sworn obligation and stated that he would come back to Egypt afterward. The request was limited to the journey required by his father's command. Pharaoh granted permission. "Go up and bury your father as he made you swear." The permission recognized the oath rather than asking Joseph to set it aside. Pharaoh released him to carry Jacob back to the burial place in Canaan. Joseph left to bury his father. All Pharaoh's servants went with him, including the elders of Pharaoh's household and the elders of Egypt. Joseph's own household went, along with his brothers and the rest of Jacob's household. Only the young children and the flocks and herds remained in Goshen. Chariots and horsemen accompanied the procession. It was a very large company. The people left in Goshen showed that this was a burial journey, not a permanent departure from Egypt. The children and livestock remained in the land where Pharaoh had settled the family, while Joseph and the adults carried Jacob to Canaan. Jacob's body did not leave Egypt secretly or without royal authorization. Pharaoh had approved the journey, and leading men of Egypt traveled with Joseph. The procession reached the threshing floor of Atad, beyond the Jordan. There they mourned with a loud and bitter lamentation. Joseph observed 7 days of mourning for his father. The inhabitants of Canaan saw the mourning at the threshing floor. "This is a grievous mourning by the Egyptians," they said. Because of what they witnessed, the place was called Abel Mizrim, the mourning of Egypt. The name preserved the identity of the funeral company. Jacob was being returned to Canaan by his sons, but Egyptian officials, elders, chariots, and horsemen had accompanied them and participated in the mourning. Jacob's sons did exactly as he had commanded. They carried him into Canaan and buried him in the cave in the field at Machpelah, east of Mamre. Abraham had purchased that field from Ephron the Hittite as property for a burial place. Jacob was placed with his family as he had requested. The oath was fulfilled. Joseph had used the access and authority available to him in Egypt to ensure that his father did not remain there in death. All the sons took part in carrying Jacob to the tomb named in his instructions. After the burial, Joseph returned to Egypt. His brothers returned with him along with everyone who had gone to bury Jacob. Once they were back, the brothers saw that their father was dead and became afraid. What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the evil we did to him? They did not question whether Joseph possessed the power to retaliate. Joseph still governed Egypt beneath Pharaoh. The brothers questioned whether his treatment of them would remain the same now that Jacob was gone. They first sent Joseph a message. Before your father died, he commanded us to say this to Joseph: please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you. The brothers reported this command in Jacob's name, then added their own appeal. Please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. They did not minimize what they had done. They called it transgression, sin, and evil. They appealed for forgiveness rather than claiming innocence. When Joseph heard their message, he wept. Then his brothers came in person. They fell down before him and said, "We are your servants." The appeal therefore moved from words sent at a distance to the brothers themselves, bowing before Joseph. Their father was gone, and they placed themselves under Joseph's authority. Joseph answered, "Do not be afraid." Then he asked, "Am I in the place of God?" Joseph refused the position their fear assigned him. He would not act as the final judge of their lives or claim an authority belonging to God. He did not deny what they had intended. "You meant evil against me." The sentence named their responsibility plainly. Joseph did not call the sale an accident or describe their choice as good because of what followed. Their intention had been evil. Then he distinguished their intention from what God accomplished. But God meant it for good, to bring about the present result, the survival of many people. The same event carried opposing intentions. The brothers acted against Joseph. God brought preservation through what they did. Their evil remained evil, while the outcome had become life for many. The present result stood around them. Their households were alive. Egypt had survived the famine. People from surrounding lands had obtained grain. Jacob's family had received land and provision in Goshen. Joseph did not use that outcome to demand payment from his brothers. He used it to answer their fear. "Now, therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." The promise extended beyond the men who had harmed him. Joseph accepted continuing responsibility for their dependents. Jacob's death would not end the provision that had preserved the household. Then Joseph comforted them and spoke kindly to them. His answer settled the question raised after Jacob's burial. Joseph's reconciliation had not depended on their father remaining alive. When no father stood between them, Joseph still refused vengeance. He named their evil without allowing it to determine the family's future. He recognized the good God had brought from it, refused to take God's place, and committed himself to sustaining the brothers and their children. Joseph remained in Egypt with his father's household. He lived to the age of 110. During those years, he saw the third generation of Ephraim's children. He also received the children of Machir, the son of Manasseh, upon his knees. Joseph lived long enough to see the sons Jacob had adopted become fathers and grandfathers. The family continued expanding through both Ephraim and Manasseh. As Joseph's death approached, he spoke to his brothers, "I am about to die." Then he directed their attention beyond his death. "But God will surely visit you." Joseph's approaching death did not cancel the promise connecting the family to Canaan. The household's future did not depend permanently on Joseph remaining alive in office. "God will bring you up from this land to the land he swore to give Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Joseph then required the sons of Israel to swear an oath. "God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here." He did not ask for an immediate burial journey like Jacob's. Joseph's body would remain in Egypt while the family remained there. His request was tied to the future day when God brought them out. The oath left one physical obligation with the family after Joseph's death. When God visited them and brought them from Egypt, they were not to leave his remains behind. Joseph died at the age of 110. His body was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt. Generations later, when the people of Israel departed from Egypt, Moses took Joseph's bones with them. Joseph had made the sons of Israel swear solemnly that when God visited them, they would carry his bones away from Egypt. The family kept that oath. Joseph's remains traveled with them until they reached the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There, at Shechem, the Israelites buried his bones in the parcel of ground Jacob had acquired from the sons of Hamor for 100 pieces of silver. That land became an inheritance belonging to Joseph's descendants. And there, among their inheritance at Shechem, Joseph's bones finally rested.